Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was heading home late one night in early September when I saw the flash of headlights bouncing off the field along County Road 17. The corn there was tall, the stalks heavy with nearly ripe ears, but something about the way the light hit it caught my eye. When I slowed, I could make out the cop's cruiser parked on the side, lights off, and yellow tape running across the road. Curious, I pulled over. Two officers were standing near the field, talking quietly. One of them was young, maybe in his first year of patrol, and the other looked older, with a tight jaw and a sun-weathered face. I stayed back in my car at first, watching. Between the headlights and the street lamp from the small intersection, I could see the field clearly. The corn had been pressed down in a perfect circle, almost like someone had stepped in with a giant stencil. I didn't hear the officers until the older one spoke. "Keep the line tight. Tight. Don't let anyone through until morning." The younger one nodded, holding a flashlight like he wasn't sure what he was looking for. They strung the tape across a wide perimeter and then stood back, peering into the flattened wheat. I couldn't see the detail from the road, but it was precise. Every stalk bent at the same angle, pointing inward, forming a perfect ring. I didn't know why I felt drawn to it, but I got out of the car. The night was warm and damp, the kind that leaves your shirt sticking to your back. Crickets were loud, the air thick, and the smell of wet earth hung low. I stayed behind the tape, but close enough to see the stalks bending into the center. There was a sound too, faint at first, like a hum under the wind. I thought maybe it was the road, but when a car passed, it didn't get louder. "People keep saying these things are prankers," the younger officer muttered, almost to himself. "Kids with boards or ropes or whatever." The older officer shook his head. "Not like this. Not ever." He crouched at the edge of the circle, shining his flashlight across the stalks. "See the edges? No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing." I stayed a little while longer, mostly to watch. At some point I leaned against my car, squinting at the field. Then I noticed it, a thin line of fog curling along the ground inside the circle. It wasn't the fog from the road. It was contained, hovering just above the flattened stalks. I blinked. It didn't move like wind would move fog. It seemed to pulse, almost. I shook my head, thinking I was imagining things. The officers didn't notice it, busy examining the circle. I left after 10 minutes, figuring I'd get a closer look in the morning. Next day, I passed by on my way to work. That same stretch of road was lined with people now, curious locals and a few reporters with cameras. I slowed to see the field, and that's when my stomach dropped. The circle had grown. Not just a little. It looked like it had expanded by 20 feet in diameter overnight. The edges were just as perfect as the previous night. Nothing appeared disturbed. No stalks bent in the wrong direction, no footprints, just a larger version of the same pattern. The cops were still there, scratching their heads. The young officer kept looking at his notebook, muttering about measurements. The older one didn't say much, just stared at the expanded circle, lips tight. Briscoe, the farmer's old hound from down the road, had come out too. The dog stayed at the edge of the tape, growling low, ears back. Every once in a while he would sit, staring at the center like he knew something we didn't. I walked closer, keeping my distance. The hum I'd noticed the night before was stronger now. It wasn't loud, more of a vibration you felt in your chest and teeth. I held my phone out to check the time and noticed the battery was dropping unusually fast. Almost 5% in 30 seconds. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was the cold, even though it wasn't cold. One of the reporters asked the older officer if anyone had stepped inside. He shook his head. Nobody. I measured everything myself this morning. No disturbances. Not a mark. I wandered around the edge for a while. The flattened stalks gave off a strange scent, like charred wood and something sweet I couldn't place. I leaned down and touched one. The stalk bent easily under my fingers, then sprung back slightly, not completely upright, just enough to move against the others. The movement seemed alive, subtle, coordinated. People were taking photos, walking up to the line, leaning over to get a better shot. Briscoe didn't bark this time, just stayed on the perimeter, that low growl rumbling in his throat when someone crossed too close. By noon, the crowd had thinned. The sun was high, shining harshly on the field. I stayed until early afternoon, standing on the road, watching the cops. They'd brought a measuring tape and some survey markers, trying to map the expanded circle. Every time they moved a marker into the circle, the hum seemed to shift pitch. I told myself I was imagining it, but my chest tightened each time. That evening, I drove past again on the way home. The circle hadn't changed further, but it looked different in the light of the setting sun. Shadows made the spirals more pronounced, almost three-dimensional. I kept thinking I saw shapes moving within it, but every time I blinked, nothing was there. Just rows of corn bent flat. I didn't stop. I didn't want to get close after dark. But I could feel the pull, the curiosity. I thought about it all night. The next day I passed by again. The circle hadn't expanded any further. The hum was gone. At least I didn't notice it from the road. Briscoe was nowhere in sight. People had mostly stopped coming by, and the cops had left, leaving the tape hanging loosely across the road. I haven't been back since then. Every time I drive past that stretch of road, I glance across the field. The circle is still there, in my memory at least. Perfect edges, stalks bent the same way. Inexplicable. I can't explain the growth, the hum, the feeling when you're near it. It wasn't frightening in the way of monsters or shadows. It was just wrong, subtle, precise, and completely beyond anything I can rationalize. The thing is, I know someone, or something, was inside that pattern. I just don't know how it got there or why it grew, and I don't think anyone else really knows either. I had been up late that night, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the stars. The air was still and humid, the kind of night that makes the crickets sound louder than they should, and I could hear the faint rustle of the corn in the fields. I was supposed to be asleep hours ago, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It started as a low vibration under my feet. At first, I thought it was the old tractor in the barn. Sometimes it hums even when it's not running, but it was too rhythmic, too steady. Then I realized it was coming from the field. Not just the ground, but the air itself seemed to pulse. I put down my mug and walked to the edge of the porch. The fields stretched out for acres, dark and uniform under the moonlight. I couldn't see much, just the silhouette of corn swaying. The hum got louder, almost imperceptibly, a deep, low vibration you could feel more than hear. I grabbed a flashlight and walked down the dirt path between the rows. The sound seemed to follow me, growing slightly louder as I approached the center of the field. Then, as I got closer, it stopped. Completely. The silence felt heavier than the hum had. I couldn't see anything unusual, just corn stalks bending with the breeze, or what I thought was a breeze. There was no wind. I shrugged, chalked it up to imagination, and went back inside. I couldn't sleep after that, tossing and turning, thinking about the vibration. It was like it left a mark in my mind. Morning came slow. I went out around sunrise to check the fields, hoping that some early mist had made the night feel stranger than it was. That's when I saw it. A crop circle. Not just any circle, but a perfect, intricate shape pressed into the corn. From where I stood at the edge, it looked like a giant tuning fork, the prongs perfectly straight, the stem crisp and centered. The edges were flawless. Not a single stalk was broken, bent strangely, or disturbed outside the formation. I walked closer, stepping carefully along the perimeter. The air smelled faintly metallic, like old batteries or rusted metal, and the ground under my feet felt warmer than it should have been for the early morning dew. I knelt down, running my fingers over the flattened stalks. They felt smooth, compressed evenly, like they'd been pressed by something heavy but delicate. Briscoe, my dog, stayed at the far fence line, growling low, fur bristling. He wouldn't come near the circle. I called him a few times, but he just stared, fixated on the formation. His eyes followed me as I circled it, scanning every angle. He refused to leave the edge. I didn't see footprints. I didn't see anything that could explain it. I drove into town to call the sheriff, thinking maybe someone vandalized my field with a prank. Sheriff Madsen was polite on the phone, but sounded skeptical. "We'll send someone out," he said. But a tuning fork shape? That's specific. By the time the deputies arrived mid-morning, a small crowd had gathered. I stayed back as they roped off the area, measuring tape in hand. The hum I'd heard the night before wasn't there, or at least I couldn't hear it. The deputies walked into the circle, scanning with their flashlights, but nothing seemed unusual. One of them, a younger officer named Keene, bent down at the stem of the tuning fork. He squinted at the stalks and frowned. No footprints, nothing. Whoever did this didn't walk through it. The older officer, Gibbs, just shook his head. That's impossible. I wanted to ask what he meant, but he didn't elaborate. He didn't even look at me when he said it. After they left, I stayed in the field a little longer, walking along the perimeter. The smell was stronger now, a coppery tang that made the back of my throat dry. I crouched to look closer at the stalks, noticing something I hadn't before. Each one seemed to have a faint indentation in the center, as if something pressed lightly on each stalk from above, in a uniform way. I got back to the house around noon and tried to work. I kept glancing out the window at the field. The hum returned that afternoon, faint like a low note vibrating through the walls of my house. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just stress, maybe the wind over the tall corn. But the sound didn't match the wind. It wasn't blowing. By evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and went back into the field. The tuning fork looked different under the fading sunlight, more precise somehow, almost glowing faintly where the stalks were compressed. I didn't see anyone, and there was no sign that someone had come in while I was gone. The air inside the formation felt heavier, like stepping into a room that had been closed off for years. I stepped inside carefully, just to feel it under my feet. The ground hummed faintly, subtle enough that I could almost convince myself it was nothing. But the moment I took a few steps toward the center, Briscoe started barking at the edge of the circle, his growl sharp and continuous. I froze, looking down. The stalks bent slightly under my weight, then seemed to recover, as if they were springing back. I didn't stay long. The hum faded as I walked out, and the air returned to normal. Briscoe didn't approach me for a while, keeping his distance, eyes still locked on the circle. The next day I checked the field again. Nothing had changed. The tuning fork was exactly the same, edges sharp, stalks flattened perfectly. But there was a new layer of oddness. Small dents had appeared in the dirt around the base of the circle, circular impressions, shallow and precise, as if someone or something had been standing at specific points. No footprints connecting them, no drag marks, just perfect, spaced impressions. I tried to talk to my neighbors about it, but they didn't notice anything unusual. Just a few came by to gawk at the circle, snapping pictures, speculating. I kept quiet about the hum and the impressions. People would think I was crazy. Over the next week, I walked the perimeter each evening. The circle stayed unchanged. Sometimes the faint hum returned at night, and my phone would act strangely near the field, dropping battery in minutes, screens flickering, but nothing permanent. Briscoe refused to go near it, and I couldn't blame him. I never did figure out how it got there. I never saw anyone. There were no tools, no tracks, nothing. And I can't explain the hum, the impressions, or the way the stalks reacted when I stepped inside. It wasn't frightening in a classic sense, just wrong. Like the natural rules for that field were altered slightly in a way that made my stomach tighten and my senses feel off. Months later, the crop circle is still there in my memory. The field is planted differently now, the corn grown and harvested, but I remember the tuning fork shape perfectly, the hum that came with it, the metallic smell that lingered in the air. I drive past the field sometimes, but I haven't gotten out of the car. Briscoe wouldn't come with me, and neither would I. I don't know what made it or why. All I know is that for one night, my field wasn't just corn, and the world didn't feel entirely safe. I'm sure the deputies thought it was a prank or some kind of natural anomaly. I wanted to believe that too. But I know what I felt when I stood in that field, and I know what Briscoe felt, and that's enough to make me keep my distance. I got the call just after midnight, the kind that drags you out of bed even though you'd been awake most of the evening worrying about bills and the weather. The dispatcher said someone had spotted a strange formation on the edge of town, down by the old Thompson field, the one that nobody really farms anymore. Corn had been left there from last season, tall and dry, swaying in the wind. I figured it was probably some kids playing a prank, but the way the caller sounded, tense, panicked, made me think I should at least check it out. I pulled on my jacket over pajamas, grabbed my flashlight, and started the truck. The night was warmer than it should have been for early October, sticky, with low fog curling over the pavement and into the fields. As I drove, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Probably just a circle pressed into the corn by someone drunk, like the old urban legends. But something about the fog made the night feel thick, almost heavy. The field wasn't hard to find. It sits right at the edge of town beyond a gravel road lined with old maple trees. I parked, leaving my truck lights on, and stepped out. The air smelled damp, earthy. There was a faint hum, or maybe it was just the wind rattling the leaves. I walked to the edge of the corn, flashlight cutting swaths through the darkness. That's when I saw it. A perfect circle, maybe 30 feet across, flattened into the stalks. I crouched at the edge, shining my light around. The stalks were pressed evenly, the ground beneath them just slightly darker, like dew hadn't settled there. I knelt down, running a finger along the flattened stalks. They felt unusual, like they'd been bent, not broken, and they resisted a little, springing back as if holding a memory of shape. That's when I saw movement. I swear, I did. Something tall and thin slipped between the stalks, just at the far edge of the circle. My flashlight beam caught it for a second, long limbs almost white in the weak light, too thin to be human. Then it was gone, swallowed by the corn. I froze, my heart hammering, and scanned the field. Nothing, just the swaying corn, shadows moving in the fog. I took a step forward, and Briscoe, my dog, who I hadn't brought but usually stays with me on these late calls, would have barked if he'd been there. I had the sudden urge to call someone, but I realized my radio wouldn't pick up anything in the field. Static, nothing else. I circled the formation slowly, shining the light across every inch of the stalks. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing that could explain how a perfect circle had appeared overnight. The stalks were all bent at the same angle, light radiating outward from the center, like someone had pressed them down with a stencil. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined it. The shape of it was almost too precise. I leaned against the nearest tree, letting my flashlight sweep across the circle again. And then I saw it. Not the same as before, but enough to freeze me in place. There was a figure at the center of the circle, just standing there, tall, thin, featureless, barely more than a silhouette. I blinked, and it was gone. I walked closer, keeping my flashlight trained on the center. My boots crunched the dry corn leaves, and the hum, or vibration, returned, faint, like it was coming from the ground itself. I bent down, looking at the stalks. The corn in the circle wasn't just pressed flat, it was as if it had been irradiated, the color muted, almost gray, but untouched outside the circle. The air smelled metallic now, faintly tangy, like iron or ozone. I stepped back, heart racing, trying to call in over the radio. Nothing. Static. I muttered under my breath, trying to calm myself, and then I heard it. A soft rustling, coming from the far edge of the field. Slow, deliberate, measured. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I aimed the flashlight there. Nothing. The fog made the field look endless, hiding whatever was there. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone walking through the corn, maybe some local kids, maybe a deer, but none of it made sense. Whoever or whatever it was had moved silently, perfectly, without leaving a trace. The stalks were untouched beyond the flattened circle. I walked to the edge of the circle, carefully stepping where the corn was pressed down. My light caught something in the center again. A shape, faint, like a shadow rising from the ground. I blinked, and it vanished. The hair on my arms stood on end. I tried to tell myself it was the fog playing tricks, shadows cast by my own light. I spent nearly an hour circling the formation, flashlight slicing through the fog, and every time I thought I saw movement, it vanished. The hum ebbed and flowed, never consistent. Sometimes a soft vibration under my boots, sometimes almost a high note in my ears. When I finally walked back to the truck, I noticed the ground around the circle was oddly dry. Not just the flattened area, but the perimeter, maybe 10 feet out. I didn't see footprints, but the soil looked disturbed, as if something had hovered there briefly. I sat in the truck, radio dead, thinking about what I'd seen. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the wheel to stop them. The next morning, I went back with a coworker, Sheriff Madsen, to check it in daylight. The circle was still there, just as perfect as the night before. No tracks, no signs of disturbance outside the formation. The corn stalks were stiff, almost brittle, flattened in a way that seemed unnatural. We walked around the perimeter, measuring, photographing, trying to make sense of it. Madsen frowned at the photos. "You really saw something last night?" he asked, and I nodded. I could tell he wanted to chalk it up to nerves or imagination. But when we stepped into the circle, something strange happened. Both of our compasses started spinning wildly, needles darting around like the field itself had a magnetic pull. I felt dizzy, like stepping into a place that didn't want us there. We stayed only a few minutes before stepping back out. As soon as we left the flattened stalks, the compasses snapped back to north, perfectly aligned. Madsen swore under his breath. "I've never seen that before," he said. Neither had I. Over the next few days, I kept going back. No one else saw what I saw that first night. People in town whispered about it, speculated, but nothing explained the figure, the hum, or the perfect circle. I noticed my phone battery would drain faster near the field, sometimes dying in a few minutes. When I brought a camera out, half the shots of the circle came out blank, or with a static-like blur in the center where the figure had been. I never stayed past sunset again. Something about that field at night felt aware. I couldn't see it, couldn't touch it, but I could feel it watching. The fog would roll in quickly, the hum would return, and sometimes I could swear I saw something moving at the edge of my flashlight beam, tall, thin, and impossibly quiet. Briscoe refused to go near the field now. He would bark and growl from the far fence line, even if I called him. I could understand why. There was a presence there that didn't belong, something alien to the normal life of the town. Months passed. The corn was eventually harvested, though the circle remained visible in the flattened stalks patterns. No one came forward claiming responsibility. No prankster, no scientist, no explanation. Just a perfect circle at the edge of town, a lingering hum, and my memory of a figure that could disappear like smoke between the rows. I drive past the field sometimes, slow, careful, not stopping. The fog rolls in, the air feels thicker, and I catch myself glancing toward the edge, expecting to see something tall and thin slip between the stalks. But I never do. Still, I know what I saw, I know what I felt, and that's enough for me to keep my distance, to lock the doors at night, and to avoid that field after dark. The circle is out there, unchanged, and whatever made it, or whatever was in it, didn't want to be seen, except maybe just enough to let me know it was real. I woke up before sunrise, the kind of early you only do when you can't sleep, and I had this nagging feeling to check the fields. I live out near Millersville, small farming town, and my farm sits tucked between two others, Johnson's to the north and the Thompsons to the south. The night had been silent, almost too silent, and that's when I noticed it. The fog lying low over the wheat, thick enough to make everything look muted, almost unreal. I stepped out in my boots, grabbed the flashlight off the hook by the door, and walked down toward the field. The air smelled damp, the kind that clings to your clothes and hair. That's when I saw them. Not just one, but a line of perfect circles pressed into the wheat, running straight across my property, and it kept going, through Johnson's field and all the way to the Thompsons. I counted them as I walked along the first 100 feet. 7, maybe 8, each exactly the same diameter. The stalks weren't broken. They were bent, perfectly flattened, radiating outward from the center. I crouched down, running my fingers over them. There was no mud, no tire marks, nothing that suggested a tractor, no footprints, nothing. I called out softly, "Hey, anyone awake?" to no one. None of the neighboring barns had lights on, none of the windows showed movement. I thought maybe Johnson or Thompson had seen it, but when I yelled their names, only the fog answered. The wheat swayed as if nothing had changed, but I knew better. I circled the nearest formation, shining my light across the stalks. The pattern was so precise, it looked like someone had measured it with a ruler. But who would do that in 3 different fields? across 3 different properties without making a sound and in the middle of the night. I walked toward the next circle. That's when I noticed something else. The air was vibrating. Not a sound, more like a low hum you feel in your chest. It wasn't constant. It pulsed, faint, like a heartbeat under the ground. I crouched again, pressing my ear close to the wheat, but it stopped whenever I focused on it. The more I listened, the more it seemed to disappear, almost like it was aware I was paying attention. I straightened up and realized the fog had thickened. It made the fields look endless. I shone the light toward Johnson's property, and for a split second, I thought I saw a tall shape, thin, moving between the circles. I froze. The flashlight flickered, and the shape was gone, swallowed by the fog. I swallowed hard, thinking maybe I'd imagined it, but my boots sank slightly into the flattened wheat as I approached the next circle. The stalks here were bent in the same perfect pattern, radiating outward. I ran my hand over the center. Cold. Colder than the air around it. Like the wheat itself had absorbed something overnight. I started walking along the line of circles, flashlight cutting through the fog, each one identical, each one perfect. When I got to the edge of Thompson's field, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The ground around the circles, maybe 10 feet out, looked untouched, as if whatever made the circles had hovered, pressed down the stalks, and then left without leaving a trace. I couldn't explain it. I'd seen crop damage before, equipment gone wrong, but never anything like this. I stopped and looked back toward my house. The fog had shifted, making the lights from the house look blurred, like halos. Then I heard a sound, very faint, barely above the wind, a rustling, but not from the wheat. Something moving on the edge of the field, something large. I shone the flashlight toward it. Nothing. I stepped forward cautiously. The hair on my arm stood up. The rustling had stopped, replaced by that low vibration again, subtle but there. I held my flashlight out in front of me, scanning the edges of the fog. And then I noticed footprints, small, narrow, running along the outside edge of the last circle in Thompson's field. They were muddy but shallow, as if whatever had left them wasn't fully solid. And then, after 10 feet, they disappeared entirely. No break in the wheat, no hint they continued. Just nothing. I crouched, shining the flashlight across the line of circles. The fog swirled, and I thought I saw something at the far end, a figure, impossibly tall and thin, standing motionless between 2 of the formations. I blinked, and it was gone. My pulse raced. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but the radio in my truck had gone dead as soon as I stepped onto my field. I stayed there for a while, circling back toward my property, flashlight scanning. Every time I thought I heard movement, it stopped. Every time I looked at one of the circles, it seemed tense, like it was waiting. I don't know how else to describe it. The wheat didn't move naturally, it almost looked rigid, the stalks pressed so evenly into the ground. By the time I got back near my house, the first hints of dawn were breaking. The fog had lifted slightly, and the field looked different in the pale light. The circles were easier to see in their entirety, stretching perfectly across all 3 fields. No one else was around. No cars, no neighbors. Nothing. I went inside, poured a cup of coffee, and stared out the window at the line of circles. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had been out here with a machine. But who could have done this in complete silence across 3 properties without anyone hearing a thing? And those footprints, how do you disappear like that? I called Johnson and Thompson that morning. They said they'd slept through the night, no disturbances, no strange lights, no sounds. Thompson laughed nervously when I asked about the circles, like he thought I was joking, until he went outside. His face changed when he saw them. "I don't understand this," he said. We walked the line together. My flashlight felt useless in the daytime, but the stalks were bent perfectly, just like I'd seen in the dark. The ground between them looked untouched, as if nothing had ever walked through it. I noticed the vibration I'd felt at night had disappeared completely in the morning air. Later that week, I tried taking pictures. Some came out fine, showing the perfect circles stretching across the fields. But when I reviewed the shots, there were weird blurs, areas of static in the center of each circle. Almost like the camera couldn't capture the middle. I tried several cameras, different phones, nothing worked the same way. The shapes, the centers, just wouldn't register correctly. I stopped sleeping in the old farmhouse bedroom, the one that faces the fields. Too many nights I'd been half awake, thinking I saw figures moving between the circles in the fog, hearing that low hum that vibrated through my chest. Briscoe, my dog, wouldn't leave the back porch after nightfall. He'd growl at the fog and stare into the fields, refusing to come inside. Weeks passed. The wheat was harvested, but the impressions remained in the soil, perfect circles stretching across the property lines. No one came forward. No equipment, no prankster, no explanation. The town started whispering again, stories spreading of strange lights, of figures moving silently through the fog, but no one had proof. I still drive past the field sometimes, especially at night when the fog rolls in. I slow down, flashlight in hand, half expecting to see a figure, tall and thin, slipping between the stalks. I never do. But the air feels different there, thick, almost expectant, like the fields themselves are aware I'm looking. I know what I saw. I know the hum I felt in my chest, the figures that vanished, the footprints that disappeared, and I know the line of perfect circles stretching across 3 properties is real. No one can explain it, and maybe they never will. I stay away now after dark. The lights from my house feel safer than the foggy expanse of the fields. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I hear that faint hum returning from the direction of the circles, and I remember the shape I saw move between them. I can't explain it, and I don't try. I just watch from a distance and make sure Briscoe and I stay where it's safe, inside, away from the perfect line of circles that appeared without a sound, across the land that none of us can claim to understand. I was locking up the barn that afternoon when I saw them first. My neighbor's kids, Ellie and Sam, running along the edge of the field, laughing, bare arms flailing in the cloudy sun. I waved, but they didn't notice me. They were too close to the new circle. I hadn't even realized it had appeared until that morning. I'd gone out at first light to check on the wheat. The sky was a dull gray, heavy clouds hanging low, and the field smelled damp from overnight rain. The circle was in the far corner near the old irrigation ditch, and it wasn't like any I'd ever seen. Perfect, wide, flattened stalks forming a geometric ring, almost glowing faintly in the mist. I had my doubts anyone had made it. They'd need a machine, and I hadn't heard a tractor all night. By the time I came back to the house, I had almost forgotten about the circle, until the kids showed up later. "Hey, Mr. Larkin," Ellie shouted, waving a muddy stick. Sam was following, carrying what looked like a bit of wheat stalk in his hand. Both of them were squinting in the cloudy afternoon light, and I noticed something immediately. Their faces and arms were red, not pink, not flushed from running, but sunburned, bright, angry red. "What happened to you two?" I asked. "The sky's been completely overcast all day." Ellie shrugged. "We were playing in the circle." "You what?" I said, frowning. "Over there," Sam said, pointing to the edge of the field. "Feshfra. We made little tracks, played hide and seek. It was fun." I knelt to look at their arms. It wasn't dirt, it wasn't rash. It was exactly like a sunburn, and I could tell even without touching them. "Kids, the clouds." I started, then stopped. The sun was buried under thick gray clouds. No way should this have happened. They didn't seem scared. They were laughing, complaining about their arms stinging, asking if we had aloe. I called my wife, who insisted I take them to the clinic. At the clinic, it got stranger. The nurse examined them and said she'd never seen anything like it. She asked about the sun, about chemicals, about plants or fertilizers, anything that could explain it. Nothing fit. No one had applied anything unusual to the field, and the kids' clothes didn't smell like chemicals. Their skin was sensitive, yes, but a burn this severe without sun exposure? The doctor frowned, wrote it down as unexplained dermal reaction, and shrugged. Back at the farm, I couldn't stop thinking about that circle. I walked the field at sunset, flashlight in hand even though it wasn't dark yet. The wheat in the circle looked the same as it had in the morning. Stalks perfectly pressed down, the center almost like a shallow bowl. I noticed something odd. The air inside the circle felt warmer, heavier. Not hot, not anything you could measure with a thermometer, just denser. I moved closer, shining my flashlight around. I couldn't see anything, but I could almost feel something like static brushing the hair on my arms. I stepped back. The wheat swayed in the breeze, but the inside of the circle seemed unnaturally still. My flashlight cut across the center, and for a split second, I could have sworn I saw a faint orange shimmer, like heat waves but more precise, forming in the middle of the flattened stalks. I blinked, and it was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the kids running through the circle, the stalks bent perfectly beneath them, the orange shimmer hovering just above their heads. I got up at 2 a.m., grabbed the flashlight, and went outside. The air smelled damp, earth-heavy, the kind of night smell that presses against your lungs. I walked to the edge of the field. The circle looked the same, unchanged, yet somehow alive. I can't explain it. It just felt alive. I stood there for what felt like hours. No wind, no animals, just a low hum that seemed to vibrate in my chest. The hum wasn't loud, more like it occupied space. I moved closer to the circle, and the humming seemed to pulse, faint but rhythmic. I froze when I noticed movement at the edge of my light. 2 small figures darted just beyond the wheat line. My heart jumped. I thought it might be Sam and Ellie sneaking out again, but the figures weren't quite right. Their silhouettes seemed stretched, thin, and they vanished before I could move toward them. No rustle of wheat, no sound at all. I stumbled back to the house, slammed the door, and locked it. Briscoe, my dog, stayed on the porch, growling softly at the field, his ears pricked. I stayed awake, listening to the quiet hum that lingered even from inside. The next morning, I called the neighbors to see if they'd noticed anything. Nobody had. No strange lights, no kids running at night, nothing. I wanted to tell someone at the local station, but what could I say? My neighbor's kids came home sunburned from playing in a field that appeared overnight. They'd think I'd lost it. I drove to the field after breakfast. The circle was still there, the wheat pressed perfectly. I walked around the edge, checking the soil, looking for footprints, tire marks, anything. Nothing. Just the hum again, faint, like it was hiding in the dirt itself. That evening, I watched the sky. Thick clouds, no sun at all, and still the kids complained their skin stung worse, the red spreading slightly. I tried covering them with long sleeves, but it didn't help. Their skin seemed sensitive to something I couldn't see. I asked Ellie and Sam to stay inside, away from the circle, and they obeyed. But every time I looked out the window at the field, I felt watched. Shadows shifted in ways they shouldn't, just beyond the wheat. The fog from the low clouds made everything hazy, yet I could see shapes moving, always at the edge of perception, always gone when I blinked. Over the next few days, I walked the field alone. The circle didn't change, not at all, but the sensation inside it did. Walking through the flattened wheat, I felt dizzy, like my senses were stretched. My watch ran slow, or maybe it was me, hard to say. I couldn't keep track of time. And that hum, always there, pulsing under my skin. I tried taking pictures, thinking maybe I could capture evidence. The photos came out strange. Half the circle was visible, the other half replaced with a faint static-like blur, like the camera couldn't see the middle of the formation. Even photos from different phones, different cameras, same effect. I showed them to the kids. They didn't understand, just laughed nervously, rubbing their arms where the red lingered. Weeks went by. The wheat was harvested, but the impressions remained, the circle still perfectly etched into the soil. No one else touched it. Nobody could explain the burns. Doctors shrugged. I tried rationalizing it. Heat, chemicals, reflective surfaces, ultraviolet weirdness, but nothing fit. The sky had stayed overcast the whole time. I stopped letting the kids near the field. I stayed out at night myself, sometimes for hours, flashlight cutting across the flattened stalks, trying to understand. The hum never fully disappeared. Sometimes I swear I saw figures moving in the fog, tall and thin, slipping between the lines, too quick to catch. I've driven past the field at night since then, always slowing down, always watching. Nothing ever happens in a conventional way. No lights, no sounds, no clear presence. Just a low pulse in the air, the impression of the circle, and the uneasy feeling that something is there, unseen but aware. Ellie and Sam eventually healed. Their skin went back to normal, though I noticed scars if I looked closely, faint, odd patterns that weren't there before. They don't talk about the circle, and I don't push them. I don't want to know what they felt exactly. But I remember. Every cloudy afternoon, every low hum, every orange shimmer I thought I saw hovering over the wheat. I remember the children playing, their skin burning under clouds that shouldn't allow it. I remember the silence and the way the field felt alive, watching, patient. I still walk past the circle sometimes, careful to stay at the edge. Briscoe follows, ears twitching, tail stiff. The hum is faint, but there, pulsing through the earth. I haven't seen the figures again, not clearly. But I know the field is waiting, and I know it notices when I look. I haven't gone near it after dark since then. I don't want to. But sometimes, in the late afternoon, when the clouds hang low and the light turns dull and orange at the horizon, I see movement at the edge of the circle, flickering just beyond the wheat. And I remember how quickly Ellie and Sam burned under clouds that should have protected them, and I realize some things exist in the world that don't follow the rules we know, and I can't explain them. I woke up before sunrise, the kind of early you only do when you can't sleep, and I had this nagging feeling to check the fields. I live out near Millersville, small farming town, and my farm sits tucked between two others, Johnson's to the north and the Thompsons to the south. The night had been silent, almost too silent, and that's when I noticed it. The fog lying low over the wheat, thick enough to make everything look muted, almost unreal. I stepped out in my boots, grabbed the flashlight off the hook by the door, and walked down toward the field. The air smelled damp, the kind that clings to your clothes and hair. That's when I saw them. Not just one, but a line of perfect circles pressed into the wheat, running straight across my property, and it kept going, through Johnson's field and all the way to the Thompsons. I counted them as I walked along the first 100 feet. 7, maybe 8, each exactly the same diameter. The stalks weren't broken. They were bent, perfectly flattened, radiating outward from the center. I crouched down, running my fingers over them. There was no mud, no tire marks, nothing that suggested a tractor, no footprints, nothing. I called out softly, "Hey, anyone awake?" to no one. None of the neighboring barns had lights on, none of the windows showed movement. I thought maybe Johnson or Thompson had seen it, but when I yelled their names, only the fog answered. The wheat swayed as if nothing had changed, but I knew better. I circled the nearest formation, shining my light across the stalks. The pattern was so precise, it looked like someone had measured it with a ruler. But who would do that in 3 different fields, across 3 different properties without making a sound and in the middle of the night? I walked toward the next circle. That's when I noticed something else. The air was vibrating. Not a sound, more like a low hum you feel in your chest. It wasn't constant. It pulsed, faint, like a heartbeat under the ground. I crouched again, pressing my ear close to the wheat, but it stopped whenever I focused on it. The more I listened, the more it seemed to disappear, almost like it was aware I was paying attention. I straightened up and realized the fog had thickened. It made the fields look endless. I shone the light toward Johnson's property, and for a split second, I thought I saw a tall shape, thin, moving between the circles. I froze. The flashlight flickered, and the shape was gone, swallowed by the fog. I swallowed hard, thinking maybe I'd imagined it, but my boots sank slightly into the flattened wheat as I approached the next circle. The stalks here were bent in the same perfect pattern, radiating outward. I ran my hand over the center. Cold. Colder than the air around it. Like the wheat itself had absorbed something overnight. I started walking along the line of circles, flashlight cutting through the fog, each one identical, each one perfect. When I got to the edge of Thompson's field, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. The ground around the circles, maybe 10 feet out, looked untouched, as if whatever made the circles had hovered, pressed down the stalks, and then left without leaving a trace. I couldn't explain it. I'd seen crop damage before, equipment gone wrong, but never anything like this. I stopped and looked back toward my house. The fog had shifted, making the lights from the house look blurred, like halos. Then I heard a sound, very faint, barely above the wind, a rustling, but not from the wheat. Something moving on the edge of the field, something large. I shone the flashlight toward it. Nothing. I stepped forward cautiously. The hair on my arm stood up. The rustling had stopped, replaced by that low vibration again, subtle but there. I held my flashlight out in front of me, scanning the edges of the fog. And then I noticed footprints. Small, narrow, running along the outside edge of the last circle in Thompson's field. They were muddy but shallow, as if whatever had left them wasn't fully solid. And then, after 10 feet, they disappeared entirely. No break in the wheat, no hint they continued. Just nothing. I crouched, shining the flashlight across the line of circles. The fog swirled, and I thought I saw something at the far end, a figure, impossibly tall and thin, standing motionless between two of the formations. I blinked, and it was gone. My pulse raced. I wanted to call someone, anyone, but the radio in my truck had gone dead as soon as I stepped onto my field. I stayed there for a while, circling back toward my property, flashlight scanning. Every time I thought I heard movement, it stopped. Every time I looked at one of the circles, it seemed tense, like it was waiting. I don't know how else to describe it. The wheat didn't move naturally, it almost looked rigid, the stalks pressed so evenly into the ground. By the time I got back near my house, the first hints of dawn were breaking. The fog had lifted slightly, and the field looked different in the pale light. The circles were easier to see in their entirety, stretching perfectly across all 3 fields. No one else was around. No cars, no neighbors. Nothing. I went inside, poured a cup of coffee, and stared out the window at the line of circles. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had been out here with a machine. But who could have done this in complete silence across 3 properties without anyone hearing a thing? And those footprints, how do you disappear like that? I called Johnson and Thompson that morning. They said they'd slept through the night, no disturbances, no strange lights, no sounds. Thompson laughed nervously when I asked about the circles, like he thought I was joking, until he went outside. His face changed when he saw them. "I don't understand this," he said. We walked the line together. My flashlight felt useless in the daytime, but the stalks were bent perfectly, just like I'd seen in the dark. The ground between them looked untouched, as if nothing had ever walked through it. I noticed the vibration I'd felt at night had disappeared completely in the morning air. Later that week, I tried taking pictures. Some came out fine, showing the perfect circles stretching across the fields. But when I reviewed the shots, there were weird blurs, areas of static in the center of each circle, almost like the camera couldn't capture the middle. I tried several cameras, different phones, nothing worked the same way. The shapes, the centers, just wouldn't register correctly. I stopped sleeping in the old farmhouse bedroom, the one that faces the fields. Too many nights I'd been half awake, thinking I saw figures moving between the circles in the fog, hearing that low hum that vibrated through my chest. Briscoe, my dog, wouldn't leave the back porch after nightfall. He'd growl at the fog and stare into the fields, refusing to come inside. Weeks passed. The wheat was harvested, but the impressions remained in the soil, perfect circles stretching across the property lines. No one came forward. No equipment, no prankster, no explanation. The town started whispering again, stories spreading of strange lights, of figures moving silently through the fog, but no one had proof. I still drive past the field sometimes, especially at night when the fog rolls in. I slow down, flashlight in hand, half expecting to see a figure, tall and thin, slipping between the stalks. I never do. But the air feels different there, thick, almost expectant, like the fields themselves are aware I'm looking. I know what I saw. I know the hum I felt in my chest, the figures that vanished, the footprints that disappeared, and I know the line of perfect circles stretching across 3 properties is real. No one can explain it, and maybe they never will. I stay away now after dark. The lights from my house feel safer than the foggy expanse of the fields. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I hear that faint hum returning from the direction of the circles, and I remember the shape I saw move between them. I can't explain it, and I don't try. I just watch from a distance and make sure Briscoe and I stay where it's safe. Inside. Away from the perfect line of circles that appeared without a sound, across the land that none of us can claim to understand. I had just finished dinner when I noticed the lights flicker. It was early August, humid, the kind of night where the air sticks to your skin, and even inside, the ceiling fan isn't enough. My name's Carl McBride. I run the little hardware store on Main Street in Hazelwood. and power flickers weren't exactly unusual here. Old lines, frequent storms. But this felt different. It wasn't just a flicker, more like a pause, and for a moment I thought I'd imagined it. The next morning, I drove past the fields on the outskirts of town. Hazelwood's all flat farmland, corn, wheat, soy, depending on the season, with the old power lines cutting across like a scar. That's when I saw it. A circle, perfectly round, maybe 20 feet across, flattened wheat directly under the high voltage lines. The stalks bent in a way that made it look almost like someone had pressed them down with a giant hand, radiating out from the center. I slowed down, rolled down my window. The air smelled slightly metallic. I thought it was just the morning, the moisture mixing with the lines, but the smell lingered even after I drove past. I wanted to call someone, the sheriff maybe, but figured someone else probably already had. Hazelwood's small. News travels fast. That evening, the power went out in the hardware store just as I was about to close. Not a flicker this time. It went dead. Nothing. Total blackout. I walked outside. The street lamps dead as well. It was quiet, eerily quiet, the kind of silence you notice when all the usual hums and buzzes vanish. My phone was dead too, though it had been at 70% earlier. I had no car charger with me, so I walked home, flashlight in hand, feeling the darkness press close. When I got home, my wife, Joyce, was waiting on the porch, fanning herself. "Power's out everywhere," she said. Her voice had that edge of worry that doesn't belong to minor outages. Not a storm, not a blown transformer. Nothing on the news. Over the next few days, the town experienced rolling blackouts. Every day, different sections would go dead for hours. Crews would check lines, substations, transformers. Nothing failed. Equipment was fine. Nobody could explain it. Meanwhile, I kept thinking about that circle under the power lines. There had been storms before. We had fields and power lines crisscrossing, but I'd never seen a formation like that. I decided to go back to the field one evening. Sunset had turned the clouds copper, and the air was heavy, sticky, smelling faintly like ozone. I parked my truck along the dirt road and walked toward the circle. The wheat was pressed perfectly, the ground firm underfoot. I stepped into the center and immediately noticed the hum. It was subtle at first, low, almost imperceptible, but as I lingered, it grew into a vibration that seemed to go right through my chest. I fished my compass out of my pocket. I've always carried one, mostly for camping, though I didn't need it around Hazelwood. The needle spun in wild circles, never settling, and the more I stayed in the center, the faster it went. My watch went wonky too, the second hand jumping erratically, sometimes stopping altogether, then racing forward. I took a step out and the compass snapped back to north, the watch to normal. That night, the blackout hit my neighborhood again. Joyce and I lit candles, sat in the kitchen, listening to the soft, constant hum outside. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't the power lines humming or the transformers or anything human. It felt alive, watching, patient. By midweek, Hazelwood was on edge. Businesses closed early. The hardware store stayed open later in the hope of selling flashlights and batteries. Phones kept dying inexplicably. I'd check mine in the morning. It might show 80%, then 10 minutes later, dead. Nobody in town had an explanation. I went back to the field a few more times, always at dusk or after dark. Each time, the circle looked identical. Even from a distance, there was an unnatural symmetry, almost geometric. I tried to photograph it. On digital cameras, the center often appeared washed out, like static. My phone's camera didn't work at all inside the circle. The screen would just flicker, freeze, then die. One evening, I was sitting at the edge of the field, flashlight at my feet, watching the wheat sway in the breeze. A faint orange glow appeared above the circle, almost like a low-hanging lantern. It hovered there, silent, then blinked out. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe it was a reflection of the sunset or a trick of the clouds, but it reappeared a few minutes later, the same soft orange, faint but clearly defined, just above the flattened wheat. I stayed frozen, not wanting to blink, but when I finally did, it was gone. Joyce started noticing it too, the odd behavior of electronics and the strange hums. Our microwave would turn on for a few seconds, the lights flickering, then everything normal. I saw her glancing at the field from the kitchen window, squinting at the wheat, and I understood why. The circle felt like it belonged somewhere else, like it had been placed there with purpose. One night, I walked into the center again. Flashlight in hand, feeling the hum under my feet. The air was thick, charged, and the hairs on my arms stood straight. I felt a pressure, not physical, but like the weight of attention. The circle seemed to ripple under me, subtle shifts in the stalks that weren't caused by wind. I spun in a slow circle, trying to see movement, shadows, echoes, anything, but all I got was the hum, the pressure, and the occasional flicker of that orange glow in my peripheral vision. I stepped out, back to the dirt road, and the hum eased. My phone, dead for hours, came alive with 12% battery. My watch stopped jumping, the compass needle stabilized. I drove home slowly, heart thumping, noticing how quiet the town had become. Even the usual distant hum of transformers was gone. The blackouts continued for another week. No patterns, no explanations. Town meetings were held. People speculated about weather phenomena, hackers, government experiments. Nobody had real answers. I didn't speak much, but I thought about the circle constantly. I didn't know if it caused the outages or if it was a coincidence, but every time the power died, I thought about that field under the high voltage lines. One night, during another blackout, I stayed awake. Joyce was asleep, and I walked outside, feeling the thick summer air stick to my skin. I looked toward the field. The circle wasn't glowing this time, but the hum was there, low, steady. I swear I saw a shadow, tall and thin, moving between the stalks. Not a person, not anything human. I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand, and when I blinked, it was gone. The next morning, the power returned, normal, uninterrupted. The town breathed again, but the circle remained, flawless, symmetrical, impossible. I walked the edge, flashlight and compass in hand. The needle spun wildly when I stepped inside, then stopped as soon as I left. My phone worked again, but I kept checking it anyway. Weeks passed. The blackouts stopped, but the circle didn't change. Electronics in town behave normally now, mostly, but I catch myself hesitating when I drive past that field, even in daylight. The wheat is tall again, but the flattened stalks are clear. I've tried to rationalize it, weather, equipment, pranksters, static electricity, but nothing fits. Sometimes at night, I still hear a low hum when I close my eyes, a vibration that seems to echo through the air, through the ground, through my chest. I dream of the orange glow hovering above the wheat, silent, patient. I've never seen the shadow again, but I know it was there, watching, waiting. I don't go into the field after dark anymore, not alone, not even during the day if I can help it. The circle exists, perfectly precise, beneath those high voltage lines, indifferent to weather, people, explanations. And every so often, when the sky flickers strangely or the power hiccups just for a second, I remember how close it felt, the hum pressing against me, and I realize that some things in the world don't follow rules, don't make sense, and don't care whether we understand them. I live in Hazelwood, and the circle is still there. My store runs on normal electricity again. People have stopped talking about the blackouts, but when I drive past the field, I slow down, I watch, and I feel that faint, steady hum beneath the air, and I know that nothing about that night, that circle, is ordinary, and I don't think it ever will be. I woke up before dawn that morning, the sky still thick with fog, and the kind of damp chill that sinks into your bones through your pajamas. I usually don't check the fields this early. I've been farming Harper's Creek for over 20 years, and the crops tend to behave predictably, but something had me restless. I'd had a dream the night before that I was standing in the middle of my wheat field, and the stalks were moving in shapes I couldn't name. It was silly, but I couldn't shake the feeling as I brewed coffee and slipped into my boots. By the time I drove the old pickup out to the edge of the south field, the sun was still low, smearing gold across the fog like someone had painted the light itself. And that's when I saw it, a perfect circle in the wheat. I stopped the truck, jaw tight. The wheat bent cleanly outward from the center. No broken stalks, no signs of a tractor or footprints. The thing was flawless. The diameter looked to be about 40 feet at first glance. I leaned against the door, squinting through the mist, trying to convince myself it was some trick of the morning light. But the circle didn't shimmer or distort. It just sat there, silent and impossible. I grabbed my tape measure and paced it out. 42 feet. I marked the edge with stakes and stepped back, still trying to reconcile what I was seeing with a rational explanation. A prank? Impossible. Nobody would dare walk through a wheat field at this hour with that kind of precision, and the ground was firm enough to leave footprints if anyone had been there. I went back to the house, figuring I'd wait a bit and see what happened in the light of day. The fog started to burn off around 8, and I returned with the tape measure, calculator in hand. That's when it got strange. The diameter was 43 feet now. I double-checked the stakes, remeasured, pasted out again. 43, 7 inches. I stared for a long time, thinking maybe I'd mismeasured before, but no, the circle had grown by several inches. I paced the circumference with my own feet, counted steps, did everything I could to verify it. Still, it was larger than before. I tried not to panic, but the hairs on my neck stood straight. I called my neighbor Doug over. He's skeptical of anything unusual, the type who'll swear a UFO is just Venus and a flashlight. "Doug, come see this," I said when he pulled up. He squinted at it from the truck window. "Looks neat," he said, genuinely impressed. "But it's a circle. Wheat bends, right?" "No," I said a little too sharply. "Look closer. The stalks are intact. You can't make this without damaging the wheat. I measured it twice already this morning. It's growing." Doug laughed, but only a little. "Growing?" "Yeah, I don't know. I'm not imagining it. I measured it before sunrise, then after sunrise, then 10 minutes ago. It keeps changing. I swear, Doug, it's not just me." He raised his eyebrows but didn't argue. "Okay, well, maybe it's the light, shadows, something with your eyes." I shook my head. "No, I've seen shadows shift. I've been farming for 20 years. I know the difference between a shadow and a thing bending on its own." Doug leaned in closer, squinting. I watched him for a moment, and then he froze. "Huh," he said softly. "Yeah, okay, that is something." By noon, the circle was 44 feet. I paced it slowly, over and over. And then I noticed something else. The edges seemed to ripple if you stared too long. Not moving like wind, not flickering like heat haze, but bending ever so slightly as if the circle itself were aware you were watching. I blinked, stepped back, and the line became rigid again. I kept notes, measured the circle every hour. Each time the diameter shifted slightly, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. The stalks remained perfectly bent outward, not broken, not trampled. I tried to touch it once. The wheat felt normal, just wheat. But the moment I looked away and back again, the circumference had subtly changed. The locals caught wind of it by late afternoon. Some wandered over with cameras, phones, measuring tapes. They whispered to each other, pointing and stepping gingerly to avoid disturbing it. I overheard one woman, Marlene, say, "Be careful. It shifts if you stare too long." I laughed nervously. "Shifts?" I said. She nodded seriously. "I don't know why. My brother saw it last night from the ridge, long before sunrise. He swore the circle looked different when he went back an hour later. We've been hearing stories about this field for decades, always when weird things happen. People say if you look at them too long, they move." I felt the hair on the back of my neck lift. The idea sounded insane, but after watching it all morning, I couldn't argue. It was as if the circle had its own rhythm, independent of us, independent of the wheat around it. By evening, the fog rolled back in, thick and damp. Doug had gone home, shaking his head, muttering about needing a drink. I stayed, pacing, measuring again. 44 feet, 5 inches. Then, when I looked away to write it down, 44 feet, 2 inches. I blinked and remeasured, 44 feet, 6 inches. I tried taking photos, but my phone kept glitching. Every image was slightly off, blurred around the edges, as if the circle resisted being captured. I switched cameras, tripod, manual settings, everything. Still, each shot gave me a different measurement, subtly, but undeniably. I drove home that night, thinking about it. The fog clung to my windshield, the lights of the farmhouse dimmed through the mist. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the circle following me, but there was nothing. Still, I felt the same uneasy awareness I had all day, like something unseen was observing, waiting, testing. Sleep didn't come easy. I dreamed of the circle, perfectly round, stretching endlessly across the fields, rippling with a low hum I couldn't place. I woke several times to the sound of wind through wheat outside my window, but every time I looked, the field was empty, normal, silent. The next morning, I went back before sunrise, heart hammering. The circle was there, of course, slightly larger than yesterday, 45 feet at the widest point. And again, it rippled subtly as I approached, as if acknowledging me. I decided to call the county extension office to report it. The woman who answered, a Miss Rivera, sounded polite but hesitant. Crop circles? We don't normally deal with those, she said. I know it sounds crazy, I said, careful. But it's precise. Measurements keep changing, and the stalks are intact. And I think it shifts if you stare at it. There was a long pause. Okay, can you send photos? I told her about the photos always coming out off, impossible to measure consistently. She didn't respond. By midday, a few more locals had wandered over. They spoke in hushed tones, circling the formation at a distance. Nobody touched it. Some claimed to feel dizzy or lightheaded when they got too close. I measured again, 45 feet, 3 inches. I stepped back, 44 feet, 11 inches. Doug came back in the afternoon. I stayed on the road and just looked, he said. Felt weird, like it was watching me. I nodded. That was exactly how I felt. And when we stared, the circle subtly changed. I couldn't explain it. By evening, I realized the field was drawing attention beyond the town. Reporters called, drone enthusiasts appeared trying to capture footage. All of them reported anomalies, compass apps spinning, GPS jittering, images flickering. One drone camera captured the circle as slightly elongated, the next frame perfectly round, as if the field itself rejected documentation. I stayed late that night, alone, pacing the circle. The fog had returned, heavy and gray. I whispered to myself, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it's just a weird optical phenomenon. Maybe it's a trick of the mist and wheat. Maybe I'm going mad. But the measurements didn't lie. The circle kept changing, imperceptibly, hour to hour, and when I looked too long, the edges seemed to ripple. Finally, I walked back to the farmhouse under the dim porch light. The wheat field behind me was silent, normal at a glance, but I knew it wasn't. The circle existed, shifting, changing, unseen yet present. I checked the field every morning for a week. Each day, slightly larger, slightly different, slightly impossible. I tried to bring friends or local farmers to watch with me, but nobody could experience it exactly the same. One would measure 46 feet, another 45 feet, 10 inches. Some swore the line shimmered, others said it breathed. After a while, I stopped trying to explain it. I still measure it, take notes, watch the shifts. I don't go near it too long, I've learned that much. And at night, sometimes I dream about it. The perfect circle in the fog, bending the wheat just so. I was on my 4th run over the Harper farm when I saw it. Clear morning, just after sunrise, everything soaked in that golden misty light you only get in early September. I'm a surveyor, fly small planes for aerial mapping, mostly farmland and timber, and I usually don't notice anything unusual unless it messes with the grid. But this time, it did. The circle was perfect. I mean, flawless. Round, maybe 50 feet across, with the wheat bent neatly outward from the center, like someone had laid it down with an enormous stamp. It wasn't a trampled patch from a tractor or any natural phenomenon I'd ever seen. The thing that really threw me was that I had flown the exact same route the day before. I knew that field, that circle wasn't there. I circled the plane back around, trying to get a better view. The sun was just lifting higher now, burning through the low mist, casting long shadows across the stalks. From above, the formation looked almost three-dimensional, but by the time I completed a second pass, it was gone. No flattened wheat, nothing, just the regular golden expanse of Harper's wheat. I blinked at the GPS and the onboard monitor to make sure I hadn't taken a wrong turn, but everything matched up perfectly. I called it into the Harper farm office. "Hey Frank, you see anything weird out there this morning?" I said. No answer at first, then the line clicked. "What do you mean weird?" Frank Harper sounded like he was trying to laugh, but his voice carried a little edge of confusion. "I swear there was a circle, fresh, perfect. I took 2 passes. Now it's gone." Frank was quiet for a beat, then muttered something I couldn't quite catch. I haven't noticed anything." "Right, but it was right there, 50 feet wide. Perfect." "I'll keep an eye out," he said finally. I hung up, feeling that pit of your stomach kind of uncertainty. Something about it just didn't sit right. I finished my route mechanically, noting everything on the mapping software, but my eyes kept wandering back to that field. I tried to shake it off when I got home. It was one of those late summer mornings where the heat hasn't kicked in yet, but the air is already thick and humid. I made coffee, poured it into my travel mug and went out to the porch, staring at the street, trying to ground myself. Maybe I had imagined it. Sunlight can play tricks through mist, maybe a reflection from my cockpit window, but I knew the moment I'd seen it, I'd registered the circle. There was no mistaking it. That afternoon, I grabbed the binoculars and drove down the dirt road leading to the Harper farm. From the edge of the field, the wheat looked normal, tall, golden, unbroken. I stepped closer. Nothing. Not a stalk out of place. The ground was dry, firm, no signs of disturbance. I tried to call my buddy Mike, another surveyor. "Hey, ever seen anything like this?" I asked when he picked up. "Crop circles?" he said, tone casual. "Yes, but I'm not joking. I saw one this morning flying over the Harper farm. Fresh. Perfect. Then gone." That's weird. Maybe someone's messing with you? I don't think so. I double-checked yesterday's mapping logs. Nothing. I know that field. Nobody's out there overnight with that kind of precision. Okay, well, just keep an eye out. Maybe it's a localized phenomenon. We laughed it off, but I didn't feel any better. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the circle. I kept imagining it expanding outward, then vanishing like it had never been there. Every so often, I'd glance out my window at the stars, trying to distract myself, but the image kept coming back. Perfectly round, bending wheat, sunlight catching the stalks just right. The next morning, I returned to the Harper farm for another flyover. The sky was hazy, low clouds lingering, making the wheat fields look almost silver from above. I followed the same route. Nothing. The field looked normal, the lines of the harvester already scarring other parts of the crop. But the circle, the one I'd seen the day before, wasn't there. Not a trace. I checked the GPS, my flight log, even my old photographs from previous passes. Everything pointed to that spot as normal, as if the circle had never existed. I started timing my passes, trying to see if it could have been some trick of the sun, shadows, maybe an irrigation pattern I hadn't noticed. But it didn't fit. The angle, the light, the geometry of the flattened wheat, there was no pattern that could account for it naturally. It was gone too quickly to be human. And I kept coming back to that image in my head, the way it seemed to exist in the light, then vanish without a trace. A few days later, I was talking to Janet, who works at the county agricultural office. She's meticulous, keeps tabs on everything. "Any reports of crop damage?" I asked casually. She frowned. "Nothing out of the ordinary. Some minor trampling from hunters, but that's it." "Why?" I hesitated. "I saw something. Well, it might sound crazy, but a circle. Perfect. The day before yesterday, over Harper's field. When I went back to check, it was gone." Janet looked at me, expression unreadable. "We get reports of these sometimes. People see patterns, shapes. Usually nothing is there when we check. Could be optical illusions, could be misperception, especially from altitude. Or, well, sometimes no explanation at all." I nodded, not wanting to press, but inside I felt that same uneasy knot I'd felt in the cockpit. No optical illusion could bend wheat like that. No misperception could erase it entirely between passes. I went back to flying for the rest of the week, always circling over Harper's field. Each time, normal. Nothing. The strange part was how vivid my memory of the circle remained. I could see it in perfect detail. The way the stalks bent outward, the way sunlight glinted across the curve, the faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in the center as if the wheat itself were vibrating. I asked a few other surveyors if they'd seen anything strange in the area. Nobody had. I started noticing other oddities too. Electronics would act strangely around that area. My altimeter flickered for a second during one pass, and my GPS jumped a few feet without reason. Nothing major, nothing dangerous, but just enough to make me pause. I didn't mention it to anyone. I didn't want to sound paranoid. Then one evening, while driving home after a late flight, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. A faint glow, pale and round, just above the field where the circle had appeared. It was low, hovering maybe 10 feet above the wheat. I slammed the brakes and stared, heart racing. But when I blinked, it was gone. I drove past slowly, scanning the field. Nothing. Just rows of tall wheat moving in the wind. I told myself it was a trick of the streetlight, or headlights reflecting off morning dew lingering in the evening. But the feeling didn't leave me. That unease, the sense that something had been there, just out of reach, watching or waiting, lingered through the rest of the drive home. Sleep was difficult after that. I kept replaying the image of the circle and the fleeting glow in my mind. Every so often, my dreams would flicker with it, like watching a faded film loop that wouldn't quite resolve. Sometimes I'd wake up, heart pounding, certain that the circle had reappeared in my backyard. Joyce would assure me it hadn't, and I knew she was right. But the memory stayed sharp, more vivid than anything I could see in waking life. Over the next few weeks, I flew Harper's Field multiple times a day. Nothing unusual, just normal wheat, sun-dappled, wind bending the stalks gently. The circle never came back. I tried to rationalize it, a hallucination, a reflection, maybe my mind stitching together shadows and light in the cockpit, but I could still see it clearly, could still remember how perfect it was. The oddest part, what really unsettled me, was the sense of intentionality. The circle didn't feel random. It felt like it was meant to be seen, then erased. There was a pattern to its appearance and disappearance, but I had no way to track it, no way to anticipate it. It existed somewhere on the edge of reality, and I had glimpsed it once, briefly, like a half-remembered memory. I don't talk about it much. Surveying requires focus, and admitting I saw something inexplicable can get you laughed off in this line of work. But sometimes, when I'm alone in the cockpit, circling over that same stretch of farmland, I see it again in my mind. Perfect circle, gleaming wheat, the faint shimmer at the center. And for a moment, I swear I feel that subtle shift, the vibration beneath the ground, the faint pull that reminds me, some things happen in the world that don't fit into maps or logs or explanations. I'll keep flying the Harper Fields for the foreseeable future, checking my maps, my GPS, my altimeter. Everything works fine. Everything looks normal. But I'll never forget that morning, that perfect circle that appeared and disappeared as if it were never meant to be caught. And I still glance at the fields more often than I care to admit, wondering if I'll see it again. I got the call just after midnight. The fog was thick on the county roads, the kind that turns every headlight into a blur of orange and white. I rubbed my eyes, tried to wake up, and reminded myself I'd seen plenty of strange things in Harper County, but nothing like this. By the time I pulled my cruiser up to the edge of the Fieldsworth farm, the air smelled damp, with that faint ozone tang you get after a storm, even though the weather had been clear all day. Mr. Fieldsworth was pacing near the tree line, arms crossed, jacket pulled tight around him. "Sheriff," he said, voice tight. "You need to see this." I followed him through the gate, boots crunching in the frost-covered grass. That's when I saw it. A perfect circle, about 35 feet across, the wheat bent outward like someone had pressed it down with a rolling pin. No footprints anywhere, not even tiny prints of animals. The ground was firm, frost stiff, and yet somehow nothing had disturbed it aside from the stalks lying flat. "Nothing like this in your fields before?" I asked. Fieldsworth shook his head. "No, last night I was in the barn around 10. I didn't hear a thing, nothing, and this morning," he gestured to the formation, "I came out and there it was." I crouched, inspecting the edges. Every stalk was bent in the same direction, smooth and precise. No signs of tools, no tire marks, no human prints. I stood up and scanned the horizon, flashlight cutting through the fog. The field stretched for miles in all directions, empty. Not a soul in sight. I pulled my camera from the cruiser and started snapping photos. Flashlights bouncing off the frost, the wheat glinting in odd, almost metallic ways. I noticed something the first time I looked through the viewfinder. The wheat inside the circle was moving, gently swaying. I frowned. The air was perfectly still. No breeze at all. I looked up and around, nothing. The fog hung heavy, trees unmoving. I lowered the camera. The wheat continued to sway. Just a few inches, not violent or fast, but a steady, hypnotic motion that didn't match anything else in the field. I stepped closer, careful not to disturb anything, and the sway seemed to adjust. Not like it avoided me, but like the movement followed my attention. I blinked and shook my head. Must be tired. "Sheriff?" Fieldsworth's voice cut through the fog. I turned. He was holding his hat tight, looking uneasy. "What do you make of it?" he asked. I shrugged. "I don't know. Nothing's disturbed. No footprints. The wheat's moving by itself." He swallowed hard and nodded. "That's what got me. I mean, come on. Movement without wind?" I started walking around the circle, camera in hand, taking more shots from different angles. Each time I looked through the viewfinder, I noticed the same thing, stalks moving, almost like a slow wave. I stepped back. The motion didn't stop. I turned to Fieldsworth. "You see that?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, exactly. How is that even possible?" I didn't answer. I knelt down to examine the stalks up close. They felt normal, cold, brittle from the frost. I pressed my fingers into them lightly. Nothing. No vibration, no hum. Yet when I lifted my hand, the movement inside the circle continued, gentle and rhythmic. I circled the formation a few more times, trying to find footprints, tire tracks, anything. Nothing. I even shined my flashlight along the ground, low and flat, letting the beam sweep slowly across the frost. No prints, no impressions, not even broken wheat from someone stepping in. I took more photos, zoomed in, tried different angles. The wheat always looked slightly different through the lens. Sometimes the stalks seemed to bend a fraction more than they did in reality, sometimes less. I lowered the camera, feeling my stomach tighten. I noticed something else then. The circle wasn't quite uniform. From above, it was perfect, near flawless. But on ground level, some stalks leaned slightly more than others, creating subtle patterns I couldn't explain. Random or intentional, I couldn't tell. I stepped back, breathing out through my nose, fog curling into the air. Something about it was alive. Not alive in a biological sense, but aware. It was impossible to ignore. "Sheriff," Fieldsworth said again, "I'm going to be honest. No, I didn't want to call you first. Thought you'd laugh or, I don't know, think I was crazy." "You're not crazy," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. "I've never seen anything like this." The fog started to lift slightly as dawn broke, a weak orange light spilling over the horizon. I took one last sweep with the camera before deciding I needed to leave and come back during full daylight. When I raised my viewfinder for one more shot, I caught a glimpse of movement, not the wheat, but something taller, something at the edge of the circle. I froze. It was thin, elongated, almost blending with the stalks, like a shadow stretched into a shape I couldn't identify. My heart thudded. I blinked and it was gone. No sound, no rustle, nothing. Just the empty circle swaying gently as before. I lowered the camera and checked my watch. Time hadn't jumped, no missing minutes, just the slow crawl of morning. I told Fieldsworth I'd get some daylight photos later and report it. He nodded, still uneasy, and I walked back to my cruiser. On the drive home, the fog cleared completely. The fields looked ordinary, normal, endless swaths of green and gold. But I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. That same uneasy feeling followed me, prickling at the back of my neck. It wasn't just the circle anymore. It was that sense of being observed, of something waiting and watching from the field. Back at the station, I reviewed the photos. The images looked fine at first, then odd. The circle appeared to shimmer slightly in some shots. Not distortion from the camera, something else. Some images had subtle streaks where the wheat should have been straight, as if the air itself had been warped. I tried to show a colleague, but he shrugged and suggested frost on the lens. I didn't argue. I couldn't explain it anyway. That night, I went home, locking the door behind me. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time my eyes closed, I saw the wheat bending, swaying, the perfect circle untouched and moving under a sky that had no wind. I kept thinking about the tall, thin shape I'd glimpsed and the way the stalks seemed aware of me, as if they reacted to my attention. I woke up before dawn the next day and went back, thinking maybe I'd see footprints by now, some sign of human interference. There were none. The circle remained, slightly shifted from where I remembered it, wheat swaying gently, hypnotically in still air. I stayed until the sun rose high enough to burn away the morning fog. The wind finally picked up, strong enough to move everything naturally. I measured the circle with a tape, counted stalks, compared notes from the previous day. Everything was the same, except that subtle, impossible sway, now overridden by the breeze. I left and didn't look back for hours. On the drive home, I passed the field at different angles, all normal from the road, but inside, in the center of that circle, the memory of movement remained, stubborn, inexplicable, almost alive. I haven't gone back in the dark since. The formation is still there, last I heard. Fieldsworth calls me sometimes to say it hasn't changed. Nobody touches it. Nobody dares. I don't know what made it or why the wheat moves without wind. All I know is that I saw it, and I know what I saw. And that's enough to make ordinary nights feel less ordinary. I was driving my old Ford pickup down County Road 17 with my daughter, Mia, wedged between her booster seat and the passenger door. It had rained earlier in the evening, and the asphalt glistened under the dull yellow of the highway lamps. It was late, around 11:15 p.m., and Mia had fallen asleep an hour ago, curled up with her blanket, muttering something about school tomorrow. My wife, Sarah, had gone ahead to her sister's place, so it was just the two of us heading home. The night was quiet, save for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional splash from a car hitting a puddle further up the road. Then, as we passed the McAllister farm, a stretch of open fields I'd driven past hundreds of times, I noticed a faint glow hovering above the crops. At first, I thought it was the reflection of distant lights from the town, but as I slowed the truck, I saw the glow shift. The light wasn't strong, maybe a pale orange or amber, and it moved in strange, deliberate patterns over the wheat. Circles, lines, and arcs, almost like someone was drawing with a brush, but suspended in midair. I squinted, thinking my eyes were playing tricks in the fog that had rolled in from the creek. "Mia, wake up," I whispered. She blinked at me, rubbing her eyes. "Dad," she mumbled. "Look over there," I said, pointing toward the field. Her eyes widened. She didn't speak, just pressed her face against the window. I slowed to a crawl, watching the lights. They hovered maybe 20 feet above the crops, moving slowly, then stopping, then forming another shape. I couldn't hear anything unusual. No hum, no buzz, just the regular night sounds. Crickets, frogs, distant water from the creek. I grabbed my phone, intending to get a video. As I unlocked it, the lights shifted, almost like they noticed me. One blinked brighter for a second, then dimmed, and the pattern seemed to stretch slightly farther across the field. My phone camera turned black and then flickered, struggling to focus. I tried again. Nothing. Just the dim outlines of the field in the fog. I muttered, okay, probably just a trick of the fog." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The lights paused, hovered over one spot for maybe 20 seconds, then slowly drifted off, fading into the tree line. I stayed there another few minutes, just staring, feeling the hair on my arms stand up. Mia was quiet again, staring, her little hand gripping mine. We drove on, slowly, the glow disappearing behind the trees. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting it to follow us, but there was nothing. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about what we'd seen. I was up early, checking my truck, hoping to find some logical explanation. Reflective farm equipment, hunters with lanterns, maybe some kids with flashlights. Nothing. I grabbed my binoculars and headed back toward the McAllister field. It was foggy again, though thinner than the night before. The wheat stood tall, unmoving in the morning air. Then I saw it. A perfect circle, maybe 30 feet across, pressed down in the center of the field, exactly where the lights had hovered. Every stalk bent neatly, like someone had traced a stencil over them. No footprints, no tire tracks, no sign of human interference. Just a flawless circle in the middle of an empty field. I crouched to inspect it, running my fingers along the stalks. They were stiff from the morning dew, but otherwise intact. Not broken, not trampled. The edges of the circle were crisp, as if drawn by some invisible hand. I stepped back and scanned the rest of the field. Nothing else. No other formations, just empty wheat stretching to the horizon. By the time Mia woke up, I was standing there, staring at the circle, feeling a mixture of awe and unease. "Dad?" she called, rubbing her eyes. "Yeah, sweetie," I said. "Come see this." She peered over my shoulder. "It's weird," she said softly, "like it just appeared." I nodded. "Yeah, exactly like that." I tried to call Sarah, thinking maybe she'd heard something from her sister, but all I got were dead lines. I even drove down toward town, checked with neighbors along the road. No one saw anything unusual last night. Nobody. I stayed by the field for nearly an hour, taking pictures, measuring the diameter with my tape, noting the angles of the stalks. Everything was perfect. But there was a small detail that didn't make sense. Some of the stalks inside the circle moved slightly, a subtle sway, even though there was barely a breeze. I leaned closer, curious, and stepped back quickly. The movement seemed to react, slowing as if sensing my attention, then resuming its gentle undulation. I told myself I was imagining it. Sunlight, sleep deprivation, leftover adrenaline from the night. But the feeling of being watched, subtle and cold, lingered, making me glance over my shoulder more than once. I didn't touch the wheat, didn't want to disturb it. Instead, I drove back home, keeping my eyes on the horizon, half expecting something to emerge from the tree line. Nothing. Just an ordinary morning. Birds chirping, tractors starting up somewhere in the distance. That afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I checked the circle again. Nothing had changed, aside from the slow rise of the sun and the warming of the field. But as I walked around it, I noticed the stalks on one side were slightly flattened, like a breeze I couldn't feel had passed over. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but distinct. I took more photos, tried to zoom in, but the camera couldn't capture the sway. Even the circle's edges looked slightly different in each shot, the stalks seeming to shift if you stared too long. It was unsettling, and yet fascinating. I left before evening, promising myself I'd go back later, maybe with a friend, maybe even a drone. I didn't tell anyone at the station or the town council. What would I say? That I saw lights forming geometric shapes over a field at night, and the next morning a perfect circle appeared? They'd laugh or chalk it up to pranks. But I knew what I saw. That night I kept the truck parked closer to the house, windows down despite the chill. Every time I glanced out, I half expected the amber glow to return, hovering over the wheat. I slept lightly, hearing the usual night sounds and some I didn't recognize. A faint, soft hum just beyond the wind in the trees, impossible to locate. The next morning, I went back once more. The circle remained, perfect as ever, untouched. I circled it carefully, checking the ground. No footprints, no broken wheat outside the formation. Inside, the stalks still moved slightly, almost like a quiet pulse. I snapped a few photos and left, finally accepting that I didn't have answers. Weeks passed. The circle stayed. I checked occasionally, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever had formed it, but the lights never returned. Locals eventually came to see it, murmuring theories, but no one disturbed it. I told Mia stories of lights in the night, careful not to frighten her. She asked a few times if she could see them again, and I just shook my head. Some things, I told her, you might not understand. I never did understand. The memory of those faint orange lights drifting over the field, forming patterns in the night sky, is as vivid as ever. And that perfect circle, standing alone in the wheat, swaying as if alive, is something I drive past sometimes, keeping my distance. The field looks normal enough in the daylight, but when the wind dies down, I swear I can see the stalks shift ever so slightly, just like they did that night. And I remember the lights, hovering over it, unseen by anyone else. I've been farming around Cedar Hollow my whole life, so I thought I'd seen it all. Storms, deer tearing up crops, the occasional drunk kid driving through the field. But what happened last month threw me completely. I'm still not sure how to make sense of it. It started the morning I noticed the circle. I was out at first light, checking the wheat along the northern edge of the property, and I saw it. A near perfect ring, maybe 15 feet across, the stalks bent inward in a pattern so precise it looked like someone had rolled a giant log over them. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing. The ground was undisturbed except for the circle itself. At first, I thought maybe it was kids messing around. I've had that before, though usually there's trash, tire marks, or at least the faint smell of cigarettes. None of that. Just the circle, pressed into the wheat like it had been laid out by hand. I took a few photos with my phone, but the image didn't capture the way the wheat seemed almost tense, like it was still holding some sort of shape. I set up motion sensor cameras the next night, thinking I could catch whoever, or whatever, was doing it. I put them around the perimeter of the circle and across the rest of the field, plugged them in, double-checked the batteries. I didn't expect anything, honestly. Cedar Hollow is quiet at night, mostly crickets, the occasional owl. When I came out the next morning, the cameras were off, completely disabled. Batteries dead, memory cards removed, or at least it looked that way. I swear I'd checked everything before leaving and nothing was loose or tampered with. The circle had grown slightly, maybe another couple feet in diameter. I don't know how it could have expanded that fast without anyone or anything disturbing the surrounding wheat. I reinstalled the cameras that night, more carefully this time. I even rigged a few with backup batteries and looped power from a small generator I keep in the barn. I figured maybe it was animals chewing the wires, though that seemed unlikely. Squirrels don't usually expand circles. The next morning, same thing. All cameras disabled around 3:14 a.m., right when the first light would start to brush the horizon. I didn't hear a thing. The generator was fine. Nothing tripped. And yet, every single camera that was pointed toward the circle was dead. By the third night, I decided to check the footage anyway. Even if the cameras were off, maybe there was something residual on the cards from before the shutdown. What I saw was, I don't know how to explain it. Static. White noise, flickering like an old TV, except there was movement in the center of the frame. A faint silhouette, tall and thin, shifting slowly. No features, just a shadow barely visible through the snow of the static. It moved in a way that didn't make sense. Smooth, deliberate, almost floating. The circle in the wheat expanded slightly while it moved, like the wheat was bending under some invisible pressure. I watched it for hours, rewound, slowed it down, but every time I tried to focus on the figure, it faded into nothing, the static swallowing it whole. And yet the circle remained, perfectly round, the stalks bent in the same precise pattern. I called my neighbor, a retired cop named Ron, thinking maybe he'd seen something similar. He lives a mile down the road. He didn't answer the first time. When I finally reached him later that afternoon, he sounded off, like he'd woken from a deep sleep. He told me his lights had flickered all night and that he'd heard a low hum coming from the direction of my fields around 3 a.m. exactly. Same time the cameras died. I went back out that evening, trying to catch something in person. I stayed in the truck at the edge of the field, spotlight sweeping across the wheat, flashlight in hand. Nothing. No footprints, no tire tracks, no sound. Just the wind, which was light, just enough to ruffle the wheat outside the circle. I stayed until past midnight. The wind died. The truck battery started to drain faster than usual. Another strange occurrence. I turned the engine off, hoping the hum I'd felt before wouldn't come back. Then, around 3:12 a.m., I noticed movement. Something gliding near the circle, just at the edge. My flashlight caught a thin silhouette for maybe a second, too fast to get a good look, and then it vanished. Not into the trees, not behind the wheat. Just gone. The next morning, I checked the cameras again. Dead. Nothing recorded, nothing left behind. I looked at the circle, perfect as ever. Not a single stalk out of place. I stepped closer, hesitated, and the hairs on my neck stood up. The wheat swayed gently. There was no wind. I leaned down and touched it. It was warm, unusually so for the early spring morning. I tried to measure it over the next week. Each morning, the diameter shifted slightly, half an inch here, an inch there. I couldn't keep up. People in town noticed my absence, and a couple came by to ask what I was doing out in the fields at night. I just shrugged. Said I was dealing with some wiring issues on the barn lights. No one pressed further. I started sleeping in the barn, closer to the cameras, trying to catch something. Anything. The hum came back each night, faint at first, then louder, resonating in my chest. At times, I'd see glimpses, shapes in the fog, shadows at the edge of the field, a soft ripple across the wheat like someone had just walked through, though the ground was firm, dry, undisturbed. One night, I fell asleep in the truck, watching the circle through the windshield. Around 3:15 a.m., my phone screen flashed blue briefly, then went black, battery draining to zero instantly. The circle seemed to twitch, subtle, like it was adjusting itself under my gaze. I blinked, and it looked the same. I tried the phone again. Nothing. I can't explain any of it. The cameras, the hum, the silhouette, the way the circle shifts slightly when I measure it. I can't even describe the figure properly. It's not human, but it moves like it is, and it's always just out of reach, always just at the edge of perception. Eventually, I had to stop watching every night. I couldn't sleep, couldn't work, and honestly, I started to feel like I was losing time. Some mornings I'd glance at the clock and hours had passed in a haze. No memory of moving, no sound of my steps. The circle is still there. I check it from the porch when I can. I haven't gone near it at night in over a week. The wheat sways gently, still no wind. And every time I try to tell anyone what's happening, I can see it in their eyes. They hear the words, but they don't believe. I don't know what's out there, if it's a person, a machine, or something else entirely. All I know is that the motion sensor cameras don't lie. Every morning, around the same time, something is in that field. Something that doesn't leave tracks. doesn't make sound, but leaves a circle behind and touches the air in a way that feels alive. I'm just hoping it doesn't decide to move closer. I was heading home from the co-op late afternoon when I noticed something weird in Miller's wheat field. The sun was low and gold, dust motes floating in the dry air, and I usually don't pay much attention to the fields on that road. But that day there was a ring of flattened wheat, perfectly circular, just off the edge where the dirt road meets the field. My first thought was someone had been screwing around, kids maybe, or a local prankster. But I've been around these fields my whole life. Wheat doesn't bend like that on its own, and no footprints led up to it. I stopped the truck and got out, shading my eyes against the sun. The stalks were pressed flat, smooth, almost polished looking in the late light. I walked around it slowly, half expecting to see tire tracks, footprints, anything. Nothing. Just the ring, sitting there in the field, unbroken. I took a few photos with my phone, mostly for myself, thinking I'd show Miller the next day. He'd get a kick out of it. I stepped back, scanning the rest of the field, and that's when I noticed it. The wheat on the far edge, near the tree line, looked different. A little flattened in patches, but nothing like the ring. Still, it felt deliberate somehow. I shook it off, got back in the truck and drove home, still thinking it was a prank. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing the ring and the way it looked too perfect to be natural. Around 2 in the morning, I got up to check the weather, couldn't sleep anyway, and went to the window. The fields were dark, quiet. Then I noticed a faint glow over the tree line, orange and low, hovering a few feet above the wheat. My stomach tightened. I rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, it was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the moonlight or my imagination, but it didn't feel imaginary. The next morning, I drove past Miller's field early, before anyone else was around. The ring was still there, unchanged, but then my jaw went slack. A second ring had appeared, maybe 50 feet from the first, and there was a line of them stretching toward the east, across his field and into Jackson's, and then over into Harper's. I stopped the truck and climbed the bank to get a better look. The line went on for over a quarter mile, maybe more. Each ring was identical, same size, same neat flattening, no footprints anywhere. I started calling around town, seeing if anyone else had noticed anything. Nobody had. Nobody had been out that night, or if they hadn't seen anyone in the fields. Miller and the others were all standing in their yards, looking confused, pointing at the rings like they couldn't believe their eyes. By mid-morning, a few more people had come to see. One of the old-timers, Lou, swore he saw faint light moving between the rings before dawn, like sparks skimming the ground, he said. Most of us laughed it off, but I remembered what I'd seen. That orange glow. My stomach twisted at the memory. I kept returning over the next few days, trying to get a closer look. The wheat didn't smell burned or crushed in the way a tractor would leave it. The stalks weren't broken, they were just bent, flattened, holding the shape perfectly. I measured a few of them. Every ring was almost exactly 30 feet across, down to the inch. I stood inside one and spun slowly, checking for tracks. None. Even the soil was untouched, no footprints, no tire marks, no loose dirt. A few nights later, I set up a motion sensor camera at the edge of the line, thinking maybe I could catch whoever was making them. When I checked the footage the next morning, the camera had shut off around 1:43 a.m., right when I thought the orange glow might have appeared again. I tried turning it back on. It worked fine. Nothing unusual had tripped it. I checked the battery, it was fully charged the night before. I kept watching the fields from my truck at night. Around the same time, I'd see faint flickers of light, sometimes off to the east, where the line continued into Jackson's land. They weren't bright, more like phosphorescent winks, just hovering over the wheat. And every time, I got that same odd feeling in my chest, like the air had weight in a way it didn't anywhere else. People started avoiding the fields at night after that. Kids were told to stay indoors. Jackson put up a "no trespassing" sign, even though nobody had gone near the wheat before the rings appeared. I understood why. Even in daylight, being close to them made your head feel a little heavy, like you were standing in a room that was too big for the walls. One morning, I found that a few rings on the far end of the line had slightly shifted, not by much, maybe a foot or two, but the edges weren't aligned like they had been the day before. I couldn't explain it. The line itself hadn't moved, but the rings had subtly rotated or drifted. I walked around the affected areas carefully, looking for evidence. None. Not a single footprint or tire track. I started keeping a notebook, jotting down what I saw, the times I was in the field, the direction the light seemed to hover, small changes in the wheat. I even tried marking out a grid and pacing it, trying to see if there was a pattern to the shifts. Nothing made sense. By the end of the week, the line stretched across multiple acres, some rings barely a stone's throw apart, others 50 or 60 feet. The air over the fields had this strange, almost electrical hum sometimes, barely audible, but noticeable if you stopped and listened. Once, I could swear I heard a low chanting or vibration, like hundreds of voices just under the frequency of normal hearing. I stopped, shaking, and everything went silent. I've been back since during the day, sometimes with Miller or Jackson. Nobody touches the wheat. Nobody tries to flatten it or step inside, not fully anyway. It's like the rings have an unspoken rule. They exist, but only if you respect them. I drive past the line of rings almost every day. From the road in sunlight, they look like patches of flattened wheat, strange but harmless. But I know better. I know what I felt that first night and the nights after. The lights, the hum, the tug in the air. And I know that line isn't done. Every morning I check. Some of the rings have shifted slightly again. I don't know why, or how, or who, or what might be behind it. I haven't gone near them after dark since that first week. I've stopped trying to measure, to document. Just looking from the road is enough to make my stomach tighten and my hands sweat. Whatever made those circles, it isn't done yet. And whatever it is, it doesn't need us to see it to keep working. I was driving home that night from a late shift at the plant, headlights cutting through the fog that had rolled in from the river. My name's Danny Carter. I live out past Little Creek, and there's this long stretch of cornfields that seems to go on forever. I usually don't pay them much attention, but that night, something made me slow down. It was around 11, and the road was empty. I caught a glimpse of something in one of the fields to my right. At first, I thought it was a patch of frost catching the light, or maybe a reflection from a sign. But then I saw the circle. Not like anything I'd ever seen, and I've been driving these roads for 20 years. The corn was perfectly flattened in a circular pattern, maybe 20 feet across. I pulled over and got out, fog clinging to my jacket, dew soaking my boots. I crouched at the edge of the field, shining my flashlight over the stalks. The circle was flawless, not a single stalk out of place. I called my buddy Rick on speaker. "Hey, you see this?" I said, fumbling to keep my phone steady. He laughed, thought I was joking, but I insisted. He told me to come by tomorrow with a camera and a better look. I left after a few minutes. I didn't want to get too close. Something about the circle made my stomach tighten, like the air itself had changed. I drove home slowly, feeling eyes on me even though there was no one around. The fog had started to thin, but I kept glancing at the field until it was behind me. Next morning, I went back, this time with Rick. We parked at the edge of the field and walked in. The circle was there, same as last night, or at least it had been when we got close. But then something weird happened. The stalks, they weren't flat anymore. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, they started rising. Up and up until the corn was standing again like nothing had happened. Rick laughed nervously. "Maybe it was just some farmer messing with us," he said, but I could tell he was as unsettled as I was. We stayed and watched for a while, walking around the edge. The pattern remained, faintly visible where the stalks bent slightly, but it was like the circle was undoing itself, undoing the work that had taken place overnight. I ran my hand over one of the stalks. Normal, nothing unusual. The ground felt like regular dirt. No footprints. No tire tracks, nothing to explain how it got there, or how it seemed to vanish by itself. Over the next week, I started checking that field every night after work. Each night, new circles would appear in different spots. Sometimes they were small, sometimes huge, but always precise. I'd come out around midnight, fog thick, air cold and damp, and I could see them from the road. When I went closer, the same thing would happen. By morning, the corn would stand back up, almost like someone or something was erasing it. Rick started coming less often. He said it was creeping him out, and I couldn't blame him. The strangest part wasn't just the circles themselves. Sometimes when I walked around the edges, I'd feel this pressure in my chest, like the air was pushing down. And there were nights when I could swear I heard a faint whispering, but no wind, nothing that could make a sound in that field. My dogs refused to follow me beyond the first row of corn. They'd growl and hack at the air, and I'd pull them back, thinking maybe they were just spooked by the fog. I tried setting up a camera once, one of those motion-activated ones I use for deer. I left it at the edge of a fresh circle around 10 at night. When I checked it in the morning, the battery was dead. The SD card was fine, but the footage was scrambled, just static with faint lines where the circle should have been. I replayed it over and over. There was movement in the static, a vague silhouette shifting among the stalks, but I couldn't make out a shape. It didn't look like an animal. It didn't look like a person. After that, I started keeping a notebook. Every circle, every night. Patterns began to form, or maybe I just imagined them. Some nights, the circles appeared closer to the road, some further in the fields. Always perfect, always gone by morning, the corn standing tall. But the soil in the flattened areas would feel slightly warmer than the rest, not enough to burn your hand, but enough that it made me pause. One night, around 2 a.m., I saw lights above the field, small, white, hovering just above the treetops. I froze, and for a long minute they just stayed there, not blinking, not moving. Then they shifted slowly, as if scanning the ground. I felt a wave of vertigo, a subtle disorientation that made my knees weak. My compass app on my phone spun wildly. I put the phone down and stepped back. When I looked again, the lights were gone. By the next morning, a new circle had formed and the corn was already starting to rise. I couldn't explain it. Rick came out that day with a camera and we tried to get photos, but the digital camera wouldn't focus properly. Only my old film camera worked, and even then the images were slightly blurred, like a ghost double exposed them. After a few weeks, the patterns kept coming, and I realized something else. The circles seemed to be reversing faster the closer I got. I'd walk into the field to inspect, and the corn would start standing back up even as I walked. Once, I counted. I swear it took less than 15 minutes for a freshly flattened area to right itself completely, all while I was inside the pattern. I began keeping my distance after that. I'd watch from the road, notebook in hand. The air felt different there, heavier, and my dogs refused to go in at all. Once, while watching a circle form from the edge, I thought I saw a shadow in the middle of the pattern, tall and thin. It didn't move, just waited. I blinked, and it was gone. I rubbed my eyes, looked again, nothing. Laura started asking why I was always exhausted in the mornings. I told her about the circles, but she just frowned and said I was imagining things. Maybe I was. Maybe the fog, the stress, the late nights were playing tricks. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I still drive past those fields at night. Sometimes I stop, sometimes I just glance from the road. The circles are still there, appearing overnight, reversing themselves by dawn. No footprints, no signs of tampering, no explanation. The air changes when I'm close. The soil feels different. The hum is almost always there if it's quiet enough. I've tried to ignore it. I've tried to convince myself it's nothing. But every time I drive past at night, I can't shake the feeling that the field is watching or waiting. The corn stands tall, and yet somehow I know it's not the same as before. Whatever's making these patterns doesn't want to be caught, and it doesn't want to be touched. All it wants is for someone to notice, maybe, and I do. I just wish I didn't. I was out in the field just before sunrise, coffee in hand, trying to check the irrigation lines before the sun got too hot. The sky was still a dull gray, and there was a light frost covering the edges of the corn stalks. I'm Tom Riley, been farming around Brookhaven all my life, and I've never been the type to get spooked easily. But that morning, something made me stop dead in the middle of the field. There was a circle. Not big, maybe 3 or 4 feet across, but perfect. Every stalk of corn was bent flat in the exact same direction. That alone would have been odd, but when I crouched down, I noticed tiny metallic beads embedded in the soil, glinting faintly in the pale light. I reached out and touched one. It was ice cold, colder than anything I'd felt outside in the early frost. My fingers tingled from the cold, and I pulled back, looking around to see if anyone else was there. No one. The farm was quiet, the frost crunching under my boots, the only sound. I collected a few beads in my hand, careful not to drop them. They were smooth, like tiny balls of metal, but they weren't heavy. Lighter than lead, maybe heavier than aluminum. I held them for a moment, trying to figure out if it was some kind of odd seed or maybe glass. But glass doesn't feel that cold without ice, and this frost didn't explain it. I put them in a small tin I always carry for seeds and walked around the circle. Nothing else seemed out of place. No footprints, no tire tracks, no signs of anyone tampering with the corn. By the time the sun rose, the frost had melted and the light caught the beads again, making them sparkle faintly. I went back to the house to make breakfast and think things over. My wife, Laura, asked me what I was doing wandering out there in the cold, but I didn't tell her. She'd just think I was imagining things. When I returned to the field later that morning, the beads were gone. Every single one. I looked everywhere, even dug a few shallow holes in the dirt where they'd been, but the soil was bare. The circle was still there, the corn still flattened, but whatever had left those tiny beads had taken them back, it seemed. I checked the edges of the field, thinking maybe some kid had thrown them in there as a prank, but there were no footprints, nothing disturbed except the corn itself. Over the next few days, I kept an eye on that part of the field. The circle didn't change, but it felt different. The soil where the beads had been seemed slightly warmer than the rest of the field, even under the frost. I brought a soil thermometer and checked it, normal for the depth I measured, but standing there it felt wrong, like the ground was holding a temperature it shouldn't. Then things got weirder. At night, I started hearing a faint humming coming from that area of the field. Not loud, just a soft, low hum that you only notice if it's quiet and you're standing still. My dogs refused to go near the circle after dark. They'd growl, hack at the air, then retreat to the house. I chalked it up to them being nervous, but the sound wasn't in the house, only outside, and only near that circle. I tried to record it once, set up a small digital recorder on the edge of the circle around 10 at night. When I played it back, the hum was faintly there, but layered with something else, a kind of static, almost like a high-pitched whisper under the low hum. I listened to it over and over, couldn't make out words if there even were any. A week later, I was out early again. The frost had returned overnight. I went straight to the circle, curious if anything else had appeared. The circle was unchanged, perfect as before, and the ground was bare. But I noticed something new. Tiny indentations in the soil where the beads had been, almost like miniature footprints, but completely round, smooth, and only about half a centimeter across. No pattern, just scattered inside the flattened corn. I dug one up with a stick. The soil underneath was unusually dry, even though the frost had been heavy. I started marking the area, taking photos with a film camera I keep for the farm. Digital cameras wouldn't focus on it properly. Something about the light reflected off the soil kept screwing them up. The images I got on film were blurry, doubled in places. The circle looked right, but the edges flickered like there were two slightly offset circles in the same spot. Neighbors started asking about the circle when they noticed me out there so often. Nobody had seen anyone make it, and nobody could explain the beads or the hum. I didn't bring them up. It wasn't my job to make everyone else worry. I just watched from a distance, wrote down what I saw, and stayed out of the field at night. Late one evening, a few days later, I was finishing chores. The dogs were asleep, Laura was inside, and I decided to check the circle one last time before bed. The fog had rolled in, thick and wet, and visibility was low. I thought I saw something moving among the flattened stalks, a dark shape, maybe the height of a man, tall and thin. I froze, heart pounding. The shape didn't move quickly, didn't step out of the circle, just lingered, then vanished when I blinked. Max growled from the edge of the fog, refusing to move closer. I left the field and locked the gate. I didn't tell Laura what I'd seen. She would have thought I was imagining things. The next morning, I returned during daylight. The circle was exactly the same. No footprints, no shape, no sign that anything had been there. The frost had melted, and the ground where the beads had been was ordinary again, but the edges of the corn caught the sun strangely, shadows misaligned like the light didn't behave normally. Weeks passed. The circle remained, perfectly flat, perfectly round. No beads returned. The hum came sporadically, only at night, always soft, always just at the edge of hearing. Digital cameras refused to record it properly. Film cameras worked, but always produced blurred, doubled images. And every time I went near the circle, the air felt heavier, like moving through water. I still go by the field sometimes, but only during the day, and only at the edges. Max won't come inside the circle, and I don't blame him. Something about that patch of land, those tiny metallic beads, and the faint hum isn't natural. I can't explain it. Nobody else can. And for now, I've stopped trying. Some things aren't meant to be solved, just watched from a distance. Careful not to get too close. I was on the night patrol out near East Hollow Road when I first noticed it. My name's Jared Collins. I'm a deputy in a small county up in Missouri. And this stretch of farmland is usually quiet at night. Too quiet sometimes. It was around 10:30, fog rolling in off the creek, headlights cutting thin lines through it. I'd been on for about 4 hours just circling the back roads when I saw something odd near Miller's farm. At first, I thought the fog was playing tricks on me. There was a light in the field, faint, almost like it was hovering above the ground, moving slowly along the corn. I slowed down, rolled the window down. The air smelled normal, wet dirt and corn. But then I noticed the animals, Miller's chickens, usually loud, pecking and clucking even at night, were all huddled near the coop. But they weren't making a sound, not one peep. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Then I saw the cows in the back pasture. They were standing near the tree line, perfectly still, staring at something in the field, maybe me, maybe whatever that light was. And Miller's dog, Duke, he was at the edge of the corn, hackles raised, refusing to go any further. I stepped out of the car, fog curling around my boots, and I swear I could hear my own heartbeat. I called Miller on the radio. "Hey, Mark, you around?" Nothing. I tried again, louder, still nothing. The farm was quiet, eerily so. I approached the edge of the cornfield, flashlight in hand, and that's when I saw it. A circle, perfect, flattened corn in a pattern maybe 15 feet across. The light I'd seen earlier wasn't hovering anymore, but the pattern seemed different somehow. Precise, unnatural. I crouched, shining my flashlight over it. The stalks were pressed down in a way that suggested nothing human could have made it. No footprints, no tractor tracks, nothing. Just the flattened circle. I stepped back, Duke growling now, low and deep. I shined my light around, trying to see if anything else was moving. That's when I noticed the animals again. The chickens were still silent, standing as if frozen. The cows hadn't moved an inch. Even the barn cats were sitting in place, heads slightly tilted, watching. I waved my flashlight at them. Nothing. I called the station, just for the sake of checking in. "Unit 5, can you run a quick check? See if anyone's reported anything unusual near Miller's farm?" Static. Then a voice, low, almost underwater. "Negative, nothing reported. Be advised," and the line cut off. I took a step closer to the circle. The corn under my feet felt strange, softer than usual, not wet or muddy, just different. My stomach tightened like I'd swallowed something wrong. Duke whimpered behind me. I backed up, thinking maybe I should just report this in the morning. But then I saw movement in the fog, a faint shadow at the edge of the circle. I couldn't tell what it was. It didn't walk or run, just shifted, blurred at the edges like it wasn't fully there. I felt a pressure in the air, subtle but pressing. I'm not the most superstitious guy, but I took a step back, and that's when the pattern seemed to change. The flattened corn rippled like a small wave moving through the stalks. I froze, staring. It didn't go away, didn't rise, didn't flatten more, it just shifted. I called Miller again. This time he answered, voice groggy. "Jared, you okay? What's going on?" I tried to explain, but the words sounded stupid even as I said them. By the time I got to the part about the animals, he interrupted. "Animals acting funny? Yeah, I saw that earlier. My cows wouldn't move for hours. Chickens weren't making a sound. Duke wouldn't go near the corn at all. Thought I was losing it. I wasn't. The dogs, the cows, the chickens, they were all behaving like something had altered the environment, altered their senses. I walked along the edge of the circle, shining my flashlight into the fog. Every time I thought I could see a figure, a shadow, it would dissolve, leaving nothing but mist. I stayed until about 1 a.m., taking notes. The animals didn't move, the circle didn't disappear, and the pressure in the air never let up. When I got back in my car, I glanced once more over the field. The circle was perfectly round, the corn slightly rippled, almost like it was breathing. I drove home slowly, Duke in the passenger seat, keeping low, ears flat. Next morning, Miller and I returned. The circle was still there, but some of the corn had started to rise. Not completely, just adjusting. By midday, it looked almost normal, though you could still make out the pattern if you squinted. The animals were back to their usual behavior. Chickens clucking, cows wandering, dogs running circles around the pasture. I kept driving past that field at night for a few weeks after. Every time new circles would appear. Animals would act strangely near them, silent, still, hesitant. The fog, the pressure, the shifting stalks, it was always there. I reported it in writing to the station, just for the record, but no one seemed to care. It didn't make sense. Still doesn't. I haven't gone out there alone since. The circles keep appearing, mostly overnight, mostly near the same stretch of road. Animals still behave oddly when they're nearby. I drive past, glance from the road, and keep moving. I don't know what's making them, or why the corn seems aware. But I know one thing. You don't walk into those circles, not fully, and you don't wait around. Whatever's there, it's patient, and it notices. I make my reports, I write my notes, and I try to sleep at night. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see the circle, and I can still hear the silence of the animals. All of them, frozen, waiting, watching. And I know if I went back too close, I'd feel it again. That subtle pressure, the ripple through the corn, and whatever it is would know I was there. I was driving back from town around 11 on a Friday night, headed home along the old county road outside of Cedar Ridge. It had rained earlier, so the air was heavy and thick, fog settling low over the fields. My truck's headlights barely cut through it. Sarah, my girlfriend, was asleep in the passenger seat, curled up under a blanket. Max, our German Shepherd, was stretched out across the back. I slowed as we passed our property. Something made me glance over the cornfield beside the farmhouse, and I froze. There were lights hovering above the field, pale and white, moving in a way that made no sense. Not blinking like planes, not in straight lines. They drifted, paused, shifted, almost like they were examining the field from a few feet off the ground. Max stirred, low growl vibrating in his throat. "Sarah, wake up," I said quietly, shaking her shoulder. She rubbed her eyes, groaning, but then followed my gaze out the window. What is that?" she whispered. I had no answer. We just watched in silence. The lights didn't make any sound. No hum, no crackle, nothing. Max sat up suddenly, hackles raised, staring at the same spot. He started whining softly, pacing in the back. Then he barked, short and sharp, but wouldn't leave the truck. Every time I opened the door to step out, he backed away, teeth showing, low growl. I thought about calling someone, the sheriff maybe, but what would I say? There's lights over my field that aren't airplanes or drones. I didn't even know if I'd sound crazy. I grabbed my camera out of the glove compartment and snapped a few photos through the windshield, but the lights were blurry, stretching into faint arcs. It looked like long exposures or something. By the time the fog started thinning a little, the lights were gone. I checked my watch, midnight. Sarah tried to call Max, who wouldn't stop whining at the field. Eventually, I gave up and went inside, locking the doors behind me. Max stayed near the doorway, ears twitching, eyes fixed on the field. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I drifted off, I heard faint tapping, like someone walking in the corn just beyond the edge of the field. By dawn, I convinced myself it was just the wind or my imagination. The next morning, I stepped outside to get the paper. The cornfield looked different. There was a circle, perfectly formed, right where the lights had hovered, stalks bent over cleanly, all pointing outward, snow and dew clinging to them. Max immediately bolted back to the house, barking at the formation from the edge of the field, refusing to step closer. Sarah came out after coffee, saw the circle, and said nothing at first. She just stared. "That's new," she said finally. I nodded, still holding my coffee, trying to make sense of it. We circled the edge of the field cautiously. I touched the stalks. They were cold but strangely dry, not damp from the fog or dew. The ground beneath was firm, no footprints, no tire tracks, nothing. I measured the diameter roughly with my steps. Perfect circle. My camera was useless. The image came out washed with light, like the circle itself was glowing faintly in the photos. Max refused to enter. He kept pacing at the edge, growling softly. I tried coaxing him, clapping my hands, calling his name. Nothing. The circle seemed to hold him at bay. Sarah tried to step in, but her knees wobbled a little. She laughed nervously, but there was tension in her voice. We stayed out there for maybe 20 minutes, took a few more pictures, and left him howling at the edge. I called the county extension office later in the morning. A couple of neighbors had seen it too. None of them saw the lights the night before. No one had any idea how it had formed so quickly, or why the corn was bent so precisely. Over the next few days, Max wouldn't go near the field at all. He'd pace along the fence line, whining, sometimes sitting with his back to the circle and watching the house. Sarah and I didn't talk much about it, just kept an eye on him. The circle didn't change, didn't expand or shrink, but every morning it looked different somehow. Sharper edges, stalks bent slightly differently, though I couldn't explain why. I went back one evening, just after sunset, to get some better pictures. The sky was clear, a cold breeze running across the field. The circle seemed ordinary at first, but as I stood there, I noticed movement, tiny flickers in the periphery of my vision. Shadows, maybe, or light reflecting oddly. Then a soft humming started, almost imperceptible, like it was coming from the ground itself. My hands went cold. I took a step back, and the humming stopped. I didn't stay long after that. Max barked from the house again, short and urgent. I got back to the truck and drove off, uneasy but safe. For weeks, I kept an eye on it from the porch. The circle never changed in size, but sometimes in the late afternoon, I thought I could see faint, almost imperceptible ripples across the stalks, like the air above them was moving differently. Sarah swore she could hear the hum at night too, faint but consistent, only when standing near the edge. The strangest part is, every time I think about going back to the circle, my stomach knots. It feels wrong, like it doesn't belong here, like it's watching. Max still won't step foot in the field, even months later. He circles the edge, stares at it, growling occasionally. I haven't told anyone else about the lights, or the humming, or the way the field seems different when you stand near it. People just see the circle and shrug, but we know. We feel it. The field doesn't feel empty, and the circle doesn't feel like just bent corn. Something was there that night, hovering above, shaping it somehow. Something that left its mark before disappearing entirely. I stay inside after dark now, watch the field from the porch with Max at my side. I don't know if it will ever happen again, but I've learned not to trust the quiet. The circle is still there, untouched, glowing faintly under the moonlight, while my dog growls softly at it from the safety of the edge. I was driving back from town around 9 that Friday night, the air cool and damp from a light rain that had just stopped. The streets were quiet, just the occasional headlights passing by. I lived on the outskirts of Millersfield, a small farming town, and I usually liked the drive. Slow, nothing much to worry about. That night, though, I kept thinking about the reports on the local news. A crop circle had been discovered in a field just a couple miles outside town. Some kids had found it walking their dog, apparently. The news said it was perfectly circular, perfectly symmetrical, and nobody could explain it. When I got close to the field, I saw a line of cars parked along the dirt road, headlights sweeping the tall corn. A few townsfolk were standing around, pointing and talking, flashlights cutting through the mist. The circle itself was easy to see from the road, a perfect ring of flattened corn, maybe 30 feet across. I pulled over, grabbed my camera from the passenger seat. Digital, a pretty basic model, nothing fancy. I pointed it at the circle and snapped a few shots. The camera whirred, then blinked. Battery low, it said. I swapped and tried again. Same thing. Every digital camera anyone had seemed to fail when pointed directly at it. Some people tried their phones, screens went black, apps crashed. I don't know if anyone else noticed, but the kids there looked freaked out. I dug out an old film camera I had in the truck, forgotten for years, loaded it up with film and tried again. The shutter clicked, the crank turned. I got prints later that week. The images were wrong. The circle was there, but doubled, like two slightly offset circles. The edges blurry, hazy, like something was bending the light. I couldn't explain it. By then, the crowd had grown. Farmers, a couple police officers, curious neighbors, everyone kept their distance from the circle. Some of them joked about drones or pranksters, but nobody had seen anyone in the field that night. The corn stalks were bent cleanly, no footprints, no tire marks, nothing. The closer you got, the more the air seemed heavier, like it resisted movement. I walked slowly along the edge, camera in hand. Every step made Max, my German shepherd who had come with me, stiffen and growl low. He refused to enter the circle itself, staying at the fringe and staring. I started noticing small oddities. My watch, a digital one, flickered like it had lost power, then reset itself. My friend Tom, a local farmer, said his car stereo started playing static when he pointed it toward the circle. I heard whispers, faint, almost in sync with the static, but nobody else seemed to hear them. I asked. "You're imagining it," they said. As night deepened, the fog rolled in thicker. The crowd started thinning out. I stayed a bit longer, trying to get shots with the film camera. Then I noticed movement. Not big movement, just a slight ripple in the corn at the edge of the circle. I blinked, and it seemed like a shadow flickered between the stalks, tall, thin, then gone. Max barked once, hard, and bolted back toward my truck. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the blurred images from the camera. Two overlapping circles, edges hazy, almost like the field itself was shifting slightly when you weren't looking directly at it. The next day, I went back with some friends. Sunlight was strong, casting sharp shadows, and the circle looked normal at first. But as I walked closer, I noticed the ground inside was subtly different. The stalks were bent the same way, but they caught the light oddly, almost like the shadows didn't align with the sun. One of the officers on site took a digital camera. Same thing, it failed. An old film camera worked, same doubled image effect. A couple of townsfolk tried entering the circle, stepping cautiously into the flattened corn. After a few minutes, they came back out, looking dazed. "I don't know which way I was going," said Mrs. Hathaway, an elderly neighbor. "It felt like I was walking straight, but I ended up in the same spot." Others laughed nervously, thinking she was exaggerating. I didn't. My gut told me something about the pattern was disorienting. Over the next few days, the circle stayed intact. Digital cameras remained unreliable when focused on it. Film cameras continued to produce doubled or blurry images. Nobody could explain the physics of it. The town newspaper ran a small story, but it didn't get much attention. Local authorities eventually cordoned off the field for investigation, though no one seemed to know what they were actually investigating. Sometimes late at night, I'd drive past the field. The circle didn't change in size or shape, but in certain lights, especially just before dawn, it looked like the flattened corn was moving in a slow, subtle ripple. I'd slow down, try to see what it was, but by the time I got close, it would stop. Max would bark from the back seat, stiff and alert. Weeks later, the circle is still there. People still go to look at it, but most keep their distance. I've stopped trying digital cameras entirely. Film works, but the images never make sense. Sometimes I see a faint outline of movement in the prints, like a shadow just beyond the circle, always blurred, never clear. I can't explain any of it. I know what I saw, and I know what the cameras showed me. Something about that field, that circle, doesn't obey the rules we understand. I don't go out there after dark anymore. I watch from the road if I drive by, and Max stays in the truck. He doesn't need to see it to know it's wrong. Something's there, waiting, shifting, just beyond perception. And no matter how many times you look, it doesn't let itself be fully understood. I was heading home from the diner that night about 10 o'clock, driving my old Chevy down the winding county road that cuts past the radio tower. It had been a hot summer day, sticky, the kind where the air feels like it's pressing down on your skin. I rolled the windows down, hoping for any breeze, but there was nothing. The fields were dark, nothing but black shapes against the night sky, and the only sound was the hum of the engine. I usually don't pay much attention to that tower. It's been there for decades, a stubby steel thing with a blinking red light at the top. But as I rounded the last bend before it, something about the field at its base made me slow down. There was this ring in the crops, wheat or maybe barley, flattened in a perfect circle. Not jagged, not random, just a clean, smooth circle, glowing slightly in the way moonlight hits wet pavement. I blinked. That wasn't there yesterday. I parked the truck on the shoulder, getting out to look. My boots sank slightly into the soft dirt, and the smell of summer grass and damp earth hit me. I squinted across the field. It looked ordinary, and not ordinary at the same time. The circle was maybe 20 feet across, and the stalks bent over in one direction, forming that perfect outline. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at it, thinking maybe it was a text from my sister. The screen was weird, all fuzzy, lines of static running across it, and the signal bar was jumping from 0 to 3 and back again. I shook it, tried turning it off, but it just went wild, lights flickering. Then it started talking. Not music, not a ringtone, but voices. Low, distorted, overlapping. I couldn't make out words. One part sounded like a whisper, another like a growl, and somewhere beneath that, a strange rhythm, almost like chanting. I stumbled back toward the truck, holding the phone in front of me. The engine of the truck coughed, then died. I hit the key again. Nothing. The field was silent except for the whispering static on my phone. I looked at the tower. Nothing moved there, the red light blinking steadily, and yet the air felt different, heavier somehow, like standing underwater. I tried my car radio. Nothing but static, hissing and murmuring like my phone. Even my old handheld scanner, which usually just picks up CB and police chatter, and it started crackling with voices that weren't there a second ago. The voices weren't loud, just there, hovering under everything else. My stomach twisted. I thought about calling the sheriff, but my phone was useless. I walked closer to the circle, trying to make sense of it. Every step made the static louder, like it was aware I was moving toward it. I glanced at the stalks in the circle. They weren't moving like someone had stomped on them. They were bent perfectly, no broken stems, no footprints leading in or out. I circled it slowly, careful not to touch anything. The voices in the electronics got louder, almost pressing against my eardrums, but still unintelligible. Then it stopped. Just like that. My phone went dead, my radio went quiet, and even the scanner sounded normal. The air felt lighter, like someone had pulled a weight off my chest. I stood there for a minute, breathing hard, staring at the circle, trying to figure out what had just happened. I didn't hear anything else that night, and I drove home the long way, windows down, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. I told myself it was interference, maybe some kind of glitch in the tower, static bouncing in the air, but something in me didn't believe it. The next morning, I went back. The circle was still there, and now I could see how perfect it was. I brought a tape measure, 20 feet across, exact. The stalks bent uniformly, nothing broken. I walked around it, checking for footprints or tire tracks. None. Even the soil was undisturbed. I asked a neighbor, Clint, if he'd heard anything strange. He shrugged. Nothing but the usual wind, he said. But he lives a few hundred yards away and his house is shielded by trees. I knew what I'd heard. Over the next few days, reports started coming in from the area. People near the tower said their radios had gone nuts around the same time I had been there. Phones acting up, static voices, a few complaints about brief ringing in ears. Nothing permanent, nothing people could trace to equipment failure. Just odd. I went back a couple of times trying to catch it again, set up a small recorder in the field at night. I didn't hear anything, but I could feel it. The air thickening, a subtle vibration under my feet. The circle seemed to hum faintly, almost imperceptibly, like the earth itself was holding its breath. One night, about a week later, I drove past again. The circle hadn't changed, but this time I saw something at the edge of my vision. A flicker of movement, maybe a shadow, something tall and thin slipping between the stalks. I slowed down, but when I looked straight at it, nothing was there. The hairs on my neck stood up, and I didn't stop the truck. I've driven past that field 100 times since, always watching, always half expecting to see that shadow again. The circle is still there, perfectly round, stubborn in the same spot. No footprints, no tire tracks, no signs that anyone or anything has been there. The tower still blinks its red light every night, silent and ordinary. And sometimes when my phone is off or the radio is quiet, I swear I hear it. A low, indistinct whispering, just at the edge of hearing, like it's waiting for someone to get too close. I don't go there at night anymore. Not since that first time. Not since I realized how quiet the world is when you're standing in one of those circles, and how loud the world gets when you're outside it trying to explain what you heard to anyone else. I had been driving the back roads near Elmdale all winter, checking the weather stations for the county. It was late February, bitter cold, the kind of night where your breath fogs up instantly and your eyelashes frost over. The sky was clear, stars sharp and bright above the bare fields. I had just passed the last cluster of houses when my headlights caught something in the distance. A circle in a cornfield. Not a faint shadow, but a perfect, bright outline in the snow-streaked corn, almost glowing in the headlights. I slowed the truck, feeling my stomach tighten. I know the area well, been flying over it and driving through it for years, and there was nothing there yesterday. No footprints, no broken stalks, no tire marks in the frozen earth. I pulled off the road onto the narrow shoulder, leaving the truck running, and grabbed my flashlight. The closer I got, the stranger it looked. The snow around the stalks was undisturbed. The stalks themselves weren't bent like someone had stomped them. They were folded neatly outward, forming a perfect circle. I knelt down at the edge of it and pressed my gloved hand to the soil. My fingers hit warmth. I pulled back, startled. The air was well below freezing, but the ground inside the circle radiated heat. My gloves even felt a little damp from the steam rising. I straightened and looked around. No wind, nothing moving. My breath fogged out in front of me. I shined the flashlight across the circle again. For a moment, I thought I saw movement, something long and thin, slipping between the stalks at the far side of the field. But when I looked straight at it, there was nothing. I stepped into the circle, careful not to touch the stalks too much. The warmth underfoot was real, consistent across the whole pattern. The hairs on my arms stood up. I checked my phone. Signal was fine, battery at 85%, but the screen flickered like it was struggling to display the home screen. Then, for no reason I could identify, the compass app spun in circles, going back and forth as if I were turning constantly. I stopped moving. The compass kept spinning. I turned slowly, shining the flashlight outward, trying to find a landmark. The cornfield stretched in all directions. The road was just a faint line in the distance. I took a few steps in one direction, thinking I'd exit, but my sense of direction went fuzzy. I couldn't tell which way the truck was anymore, and the more I tried to orient myself, the more disoriented I felt. My phone's GPS read me walking in odd, looping paths I didn't recognize. The ground was warm, the circle perfect, and that faint feeling that someone or something was watching me had grown. I crouched down to see if I could notice footprints leading in, anything at all. None. The snow was untouched around the circle. No sign of human activity, mechanical interference, nothing. I stepped back, flashlight sweeping the edge of the field. Then I saw them, or maybe it was one thing, moving just beyond the circle. Pale shapes too tall to be normal, moving between the stalks, almost floating. I blinked, and they were gone. I swore I saw them a second ago, but now there was nothing but swaying corn in the cold wind I couldn't feel. I heard a low hum, almost like machinery, but faint, and it seemed to come from the soil itself. I knelt again and placed my hand on the ground. My gloves were off this time. The warmth was still there, stronger now, almost pulsing beneath my fingers. I could feel it in my palms, rising up into my arms. I shook my hand, startled, and it went back to normal, but the hum stayed. I took a step backward, then two, trying to find the edge of the circle. My boots sank slightly into the damp soil, which made no sense. It should have been frozen solid. Every step I took felt heavier, like the ground itself was resisting me. The more I tried to move, the more my sense of time warped. I looked at my watch. It had jumped ahead 15 minutes in just a few seconds. I shook it, but it was moving normally again. I turned toward the road, thinking I could just sprint back to the truck, but the compass on my phone spun madly again. My phone buzzed, then went dead. I tried the truck's remote lock. Nothing. The hum in the soil continued, faint but steady. I took a deep breath and decided to back away slowly, using the flashlight to keep my bearings on the road lights in the distance. When I finally broke the edge of the field, the warmth dissipated, my sense of direction snapped back, and the hum vanished. My hands were cold again, fingers stiff from the chill. I ran to the truck and climbed inside, slamming the door, fumbling for the keys. The engine started on the first try. I drove straight home without stopping, not daring to look back. The next morning, I called the county extension office. A few other farmers had noticed something odd too, a circle in their cornfields, but none of them reported warmth. Most said the stalks looked flattened overnight, like someone had laid them down with care. No footprints, no signs of equipment, nothing. I drove back after sunrise. The circle had stayed untouched, the stalks still bent perfectly. I tested the soil. It had cooled by then, the warmth gone. The air was still below freezing. I measured it. The diameter was consistent, edges perfect. No signs of human tampering. I didn't tell anyone much about the warmth or the humming. It sounds insane, and even thinking about it makes my stomach twist. I've driven past that field a dozen times since. The circle is still there in the winter corn, always perfectly circular, stubborn as if it owns that patch of land. I haven't gone near it at night again. Every time I do, I feel the air get heavier, the faint hum in the soil tickling the edge of my hearing. Something is there in the circle, or maybe beneath it, but it's quiet now, watching, waiting. I tell myself it was geothermal activity, interference, maybe my imagination. But then sometimes when I drive by, even in broad daylight, I swear I feel a pulse from the ground, and I wonder if the circle has shifted slightly since I last measured it, like it's alive and moving in ways I can't see. I was called out around midnight to the north edge of Harper's wheat fields. The dispatcher didn't have much info. Possible disturbance in the crops. When I got there, the moon was low behind scattered clouds, just enough light to see the wheat rippling. That's when I saw it. A perfect circle, maybe 20 feet across, flattened so precisely it looked like someone had rolled a giant stamp across the field. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing. I stepped out of my cruiser and my boots sank slightly into the soft soil. The wheat inside the circle had a subtle sheen, almost like dew, but the ground was dry. And then I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind, a low hum moving through the stalks. But it wasn't. Not really. It sounded like a chant, faint and melodic, vibrating at a pitch I could feel more than hear. I paused, flashlight in hand, scanning the perimeter. Nothing. Just the wheat, swaying gently despite the air being still. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice carried across the field, but there was no answer, just that soft, eerie chanting. I leaned closer to the circle. The sound seemed louder, clearer somehow, but when I glanced around, the edges of the field were empty. No other cars, no figures, nothing that could be making that sound. I knelt to inspect the wheat. It was bent but not broken, pressed in a pattern that looked deliberate, almost like waves radiating from the center. I pulled out my radio and tried to call the dispatcher, but the static cut in and out. "Unit 12, can you copy?" Over. Nothing but white noise. I switched to my phone. Same thing. Signal lost, no bars. That was the first odd thing that night. The field seemed to interfere with electronics. I stayed for a few minutes, trying to figure out what I was hearing. The chant, or hum, wasn't words, not in any language I recognized. More like a vibration that wrapped around my ears and chest. I shook my head, thinking maybe I was imagining it, stressed from a long shift and a late night. Then I saw movement at the edge of the circle, a shadow, tall and thin, gliding between the wheat. I froze. The figure didn't walk, it floated, smoothly, silently. My light caught it for a fraction of a second, but when I blinked, it was gone. Just empty stalks, still swaying. I stepped back, my heart thudding, and tried to call it out. "Hey, stop! Who's there?" No response, only the chant, low and constant. I wanted to run, but some part of me stayed, drawn in by the sound. I circled the formation slowly, careful not to step inside it, trying to see if the shadow would appear again. After a while, the chanting faded, leaving only the soft rustle of wheat. I radioed the dispatcher again. Signal returned immediately. "Unit 12, status?" I reported what I'd seen and heard, but the words sounded ridiculous, even as I said them. A perfect circle, a hum no one else could hear, a shadow that vanished. The next morning, I went back in daylight. The circle was still there, undisturbed, pristine as if untouched since the night before. I measured it, diameter almost exactly 20 feet, edges precise, symmetrical. I took photos for the report, but the images didn't capture what I'd experienced. No shimmer, no hum, no shadow, just flattened wheat. I asked a couple of local farmers about it. No one else had been out at night, no one heard chanting, no strange movements. The field was quiet. One neighbor joked it was wheat elves or kids with planks. I smiled politely, but I knew it was something else, something I couldn't explain. A few nights later, I went back, curious and cautious. The hum returned as I approached the circle, soft and low. I didn't see the shadow this time, just a flicker at the edge of my vision, like heat haze or a trick of the moonlight. My phone drained rapidly. Even though the battery was full when I started, I had to leave before it went completely dead. In the days after, I noticed odd things. Clocks ran slow, small electronics glitching in my house, even a neighbor's radio turned on by itself while we talked about the field. I'm not saying the circle caused it, but the timing was uncanny. I kept checking the field, sometimes from the road, sometimes staying late in my cruiser. The circle never changed visibly during the day, but the sense that it was alive, or at least responsive, never left me. Watching it, I felt tension in the air, subtle vibrations in my chest, like the field was aware I was there. The shadow never appeared again while I watched, but I began noticing other things, small details that didn't make sense. Stalks at the circle's edge would tilt slightly toward me if I lingered too long. Birds avoided the area entirely, not flying over it, not perching nearby. Even the wind seemed to bend around the formation. I tried to talk myself down, rational explanations, tricks of light, stress, exhaustion, but that hum was undeniable. A real sensation I could feel vibrating through me. And the circle, perfect, precise, untouched, defied any logical explanation for its creation overnight. I still drive past the field sometimes, late at night. The wheat glows faintly in the moonlight, perfect and silent, waiting. And sometimes when the wind dies and the night is still, I swear I hear it again, the low, melodic chanting, just beneath hearing, just enough to make the hair on my arms stand up. I've never told anyone everything I saw that night. They'd laugh, dismiss it. I can't blame them, but I know what I heard, what I felt, and what I saw. And sometimes when the hum starts in my dreams, I wonder if the circle is still watching. I was driving home from a late shift at the diner, around 10:30, when I noticed something odd in the cornfields off County Road 14. The sky was clear, crisp for early fall, and the moon was bright enough to cast long shadows across the fields. I slowed down because something about the way the corn shimmered made me uneasy. At first, I thought it was just moonlight catching on wet leaves from the drizzle earlier, but then I saw it. A perfect circle, maybe 30 feet across, flattened into a pattern that looked almost like a compass rose. I parked my truck at the edge of the field. There wasn't a sound, no rustling of animals, no wind, just the quiet night. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, my boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The stalks at the edge of the circle were bent outward neatly, like someone had pressed down every single one by hand, and the inner lines were precise, radiating from the center. It was so geometrically perfect that it felt unnatural. I called out to see if anyone was around, maybe some prankster, but only my voice echoed back. When I shined my flashlight into the pattern, I felt a strange tug in my chest, like stepping into it made the air itself thicker. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The second I did, I realized something was wrong. I tried to walk toward the center, but my sense of direction went completely haywire. No matter which way I pointed, I ended up walking back near the edge like the compass in my head was spinning. I stopped, thinking maybe I was just tired, but even when I closed my eyes and tried to orient myself, the feeling didn't go away. I turned in a circle, then another, trying to find the way out, but each step seemed to bring me back where I started. My flashlight beam swung wildly over the flattened corn, and it didn't help. I yelled for help, hoping anyone would be nearby, but the night stayed silent. My phone was in my pocket. I tried to pull it out, but my hands were shaking. I unlocked it and tried to use the GPS, but the map spun slowly, indecipherable. The compass app refused to settle on a direction, spinning like it was broken. I realized then that this wasn't just disorientation from fatigue. Something about this circle made the world itself confusing. After what felt like 15 minutes, maybe longer, I don't know, I had no sense of time. I stumbled toward what I thought was the edge. The corn thinned, and finally the pattern ended. The second I stepped out, the sense of normal orientation came rushing back. I checked my phone. No spinning compass, GPS working fine. My heart was hammering. I looked back at the field. The pattern glowed faintly in the moonlight, edges so clean it looked like someone had taken a stencil and pressed it down. I stayed on the road, staring at it from my truck for another 10 minutes before I finally drove home. The whole time, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone following me, but the road was empty. The next day, I went back with my neighbor, Mark. I wanted a second opinion, someone else to confirm I wasn't imagining things. Mark is a farmer. He's seen strange things too, but nothing like this. We stepped into the circle together. Mark walked in one direction, I in another. Within seconds, we were both laughing nervously because we kept ending up in the same place, near the edge. I swear we tried walking straight, diagonally, even backward, and we circled the center over and over. Mark finally gave up and said, "I don't like this, Sam. There's something wrong here." I agreed. I took photos, but they didn't capture the feeling, the vertigo, the pull of the circle. On the images, the pattern looked perfect and static, as if frozen in time. Over the next few days, I noticed strange things happening around town. People who had walked into that field reported headaches, mild nausea, or an odd sense of vertigo that lasted for hours. A kid who wandered too close got lost for nearly half an hour before wandering back confused and upset, insisting he had walked straight the whole time but couldn't find the way out. I stopped going back to the field at night. Even driving past it in daylight gave me an uneasy feeling, like the circle was watching, waiting. The corn itself seemed normal under the sun. No shimmer, no strange shadows, but at night it seemed alive, like it could shift reality just enough to disorient anyone who crossed it. A week later, the local paper ran a small article. Unexplained crop pattern discovered near County Road 14. They mentioned the compass-like shape, the flattened corn, and that no one reported footprints leading into the pattern. I didn't call the police or make a report. What could I say that wouldn't make me sound insane? Sometimes I think about that night, and I can still feel the subtle tug when I imagine stepping into the circle. The compass lines aren't just shapes, they're like a trap pulling your mind in loops. I've never gone back at night, but occasionally when the wind is dead and the moon is bright, I think I see the faint outline of the pattern from the road, glowing in a way that doesn't belong, and I wonder if anyone who walks in now would ever find the way out. I keep thinking someone will investigate more, maybe a scientist or someone from the county, but nothing ever comes. The field remains quiet, untouched, perfectly aligned. I tell friends it's just some weird farmer prank, but I know better. And I know that if you step inside that compass, even for a second, the world doesn't work the way it's supposed to. I noticed it first on my morning run. The air was damp, thick with fog rolling off the creek that cuts through the edge of town, and the streetlights barely made dents in the gray. I usually run past the water tower on Lincoln Street. It's old, slightly leaning, and everyone around here just ignores it. But that morning, something about the field beneath it caught my eye. There was a perfect circle, maybe 20 feet across, pressed into the grass like someone had used a giant stamp. The edges were flawless, the blades bent in a uniform direction. I stopped mid-stride, gulping cold air, and stared. I didn't hear any engines, no kids running through the field, nothing. Just the muted sound of my own breathing and the soft swish of grass under my shoes. I reached for my phone, but the screen kept flickering, like it wasn't getting a signal. Weird, because usually coverage out here is fine. I shook it and tried again, finally snapping a picture. The fog made it look hazy, but the circle itself was sharp, clean, unnatural. I kept running, but my mind wouldn't let it go. The closer I got to the water tower, the more uneasy I felt, like I was being watched. Not someone hidden in the fog, just observed. I told myself it was nothing, probably just kids pulling a prank or some weird mowing pattern, but nothing about that circle felt ordinary. By mid-morning, the town started noticing odd things. My neighbor, a retired firefighter named Dale, came over banging on my door, looking flustered. "Have you noticed the water?" he asked. "What about it?" I said. "Try turning on your tap." "Brown as mud this morning. Can't get a drink, can't flush a toilet properly. Whole town's like this." I ran to the kitchen, filled a glass, and yeah, brown sediment floating in slow swirls, tiny clumps sticking to the sides. I rinsed it out, tried again. Same thing. It took hours before the water ran clear, and even then, people were muttering about contamination, sending messages to the city, posting warnings on the local Facebook page. By afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my jacket and headed back to the field. No fog this time, sun breaking through low clouds. The circle was still there. I walked around it, careful not to step inside. The grass seemed almost oily under my fingertips, stiff but unbroken. I crouched to examine the edges. Every blade bent outward, perfectly aligned, as if some invisible hand had flattened them from the center. I noticed something else. Tiny particles, like ash, settled over the grass. Not much, barely visible, but they weren't on the surrounding field, only inside the circle. I rubbed my fingers over them. They felt gritty, but light, almost metallic. I stepped back, and that's when I heard it. A low hum, faint at first, like distant power lines, but irregular. I looked toward the water tower. It was quiet, just the way it always is. The hum didn't have a direction. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I called my brother Kevin, telling him to check it out. He laughed. "A crop circle? You're seeing things, Mike." But when he arrived, he stopped mid-step, squinting at the field. "Huh, that's weird." We circled it slowly. Kevin kicked at the grass a little, the slop, and it bent back into place immediately. He looked at me, uneasy. Did it just straighten itself? I shrugged. I thought I was imagining it. We noticed the hum again, louder this time, vibrating in our chests. I reached for my phone to record it, but the microphone didn't pick up anything. Nothing. The hum was real but invisible to the devices around us. We stayed maybe 10 minutes, just standing, trying to figure out if the sound was from something natural, a wind shift, traffic, the water tower itself. The hum never stopped, and every time I tried to focus on it, the circle seemed off, like the perimeter wasn't a perfect circle anymore. Not visibly changed, but my eyes refused to rest on it for more than a few seconds without feeling dizzy, disoriented. Finally, Kevin said, "Let's get out of here." We backed away slowly, eyes never leaving the circle. As we turned, I thought I saw something flicker near the edge of the field. A figure, tall and thin, slipping between the blades, gone as soon as I blinked. I swore to myself I didn't imagine it, but Kevin didn't see it, and when I pointed, he just shook his head. That night, the hum was still in my head. I couldn't sleep, kept picturing the circle, the particles on the grass, that fleeting shadow. I even checked the local news. Nothing unusual reported besides the water problem, which the city blamed on a minor contamination in the reservoir. It made sense, except for one thing. The contamination didn't reach the storage tanks. The system should have filtered it out before reaching homes. Over the next few days, people stopped mentioning the brown water as much, but the story stuck in my head. I went back to the field once more, camera ready, hoping to catch something. Nothing had changed in appearance. The blades were still bent, perfectly uniform, the particles still faintly visible. I even stepped inside the circle this time, gingerly, and the hum returned instantly, stronger. My stomach twisted as if the energy there had weight. I didn't stay long, maybe a minute, but that was enough. When I stepped out, it faded. I took photos, measured the diameter, tried to capture the particles, but every image looked normal, just a flat patch of grass. No hum, no figures, nothing unusual on film. Yet my memories, the sense of being observed, the faint metallic grit under my fingers, all of it stayed real. I haven't gone back since. The circle remains in the field, though the town is quiet again. Faucets run clear, kids play near the water tower without concern, but every time I drive past, I slow down. I check the grass, the air, the way the morning sunlight hits the field. Sometimes when it's quiet enough, I swear I hear a faint hum, like distant power lines, like the earth itself vibrating just under the surface. I don't talk much about it to anyone. People would laugh or assume I was making it up. But I know what I saw: the circle, the particles, the hum, and the feeling that someone or something was watching the town that morning. And every time I think about that day, I wonder if it was just a crop circle, or if it was something else, something we'll never fully understand. I was up before sunrise that morning, heading out toward the edge of town where the old Miller farm had been getting a lot of attention. Word had spread fast. Some kind of circle had shown up overnight in the corn. I don't usually go to things like that, crowds, people gawking, but I was curious. Not curious like aliens, curious, more like I wanted to see what could flatten a whole section of corn without leaving tracks. When I got there, there were already 10 or 12 people milling around the field, camera phones out, kids dragging their bikes along the edge. The air was still damp from a fog that hadn't burned off yet. It smelled like wet dirt and corn husks. There wasn't a breeze, and it felt heavier than normal. I parked at the gravel road and walked up, trying to stay toward the back. The circle was huge. From the road, it looked like someone had pressed the corn straight down in the middle of the field. The stalks weren't broken, just bent flat, swirling outward in a spiral pattern. There were clean edges where the standing corn met the flattened sections, like a perfect outline. Most people were just staring or snapping pictures. Some were talking about who might have done it, some talking about drones. I noticed a man closer to the center, middle-aged, wearing a faded baseball cap. He had a cell phone out, looking like he was filming or taking pictures, but his expression wasn't casual. His brow was furrowed, and every few seconds he would glance down at the phone, muttering under his breath. He was standing right inside the circle when it happened. I didn't see it at first, but then he pulled his phone back to look at the screen and froze. He tapped at it a few times, shaking it, muttering, "No, no, this can't be right." I walked closer. His phone battery indicator had been at 80%. Now it read 0. He kept tapping it, turning it off and on, but the moment he stepped 1 foot inside the circle, it drained instantly. The screen went black. He looked at me, wide-eyed, like he expected me to explain it. I didn't say anything because I had no explanation. I'd never seen a battery die that fast, not in winter, not in summer, not anywhere. He backed out of the circle, slowly, holding his phone like it was fragile glass. As soon as he crossed the edge, the battery jumped back up to 79%, like nothing had happened. He muttered some curse and stayed at the perimeter, refusing to step inside again. I watched him for a few minutes. Other people didn't notice. Their phones worked fine, though I didn't see anyone else venture into the flattened section. The stalks made a soft rustling sound under my feet as I walked up to the edge. The pattern was precise, almost mathematical, the way the rows swirled around a tight center. I bent down to touch the corn. It felt warm, not like soil warmed by the sun, but warm in a way that seemed to hum against my fingers. I backed out, suddenly aware that the fog had thickened a little. My own phone hadn't died yet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it might. There was something odd about standing inside that space. Not fear exactly, but awareness, like the air itself was wrong. A few more locals wandered in, laughing, taking selfies. I stayed on the edge, watching the way the stalks bent back to standing corn. There wasn't any damage, no footprints. If someone had walked through to flatten it, they would have left marks, and yet the pattern was flawless. After about half an hour, a small group of kids tried to run across the circle. Their phones stayed on, but Briscoe, the miller's old dog, started barking from the far fence line, low and guttural. Not playful, not excited. He stayed at the edge, eyes fixed on the formation. It made me uneasy. The kids ran back out quickly. Briscoe didn't stop watching, even after they disappeared down the road. I stayed a little longer, wandering around the edge. The sun was starting to peek over the tree line, casting long, thin shadows across the flattened corn. There was no wind, but the stalks in the circle seemed to sway slightly. Not like they were moving, just shifting in a way that was almost imperceptible. By the time I turned to leave, the man with the dead phone was still standing at the perimeter. He refused to say a word, just stared at the formation, checking his phone every so often as if expecting it to explode. I drove home slowly, the feeling of that space still on my skin. My own phone had dropped a couple of percentage points, but nothing like his. When I got inside, I checked the battery. Normal, no problems. The circle stayed there for days. People came from neighboring towns, taking pictures, walking around, but no one else reported phone issues. I drove past one evening, sun low, casting a golden glow over the field. The circle was intact, perfect, and Briscoe's barking from the edge of the fence was faint in the distance, like some echo of that first morning. I never went inside it myself. I couldn't explain what had happened to that man's phone, and I didn't want to risk finding out firsthand. But I know what I saw. A space like that, so exact, so isolated, where electronics just failed, felt like nothing I'd ever experienced. I told a couple friends about it later, but they laughed it off. Phones die, one said. Another suggested a software glitch. I wanted to believe that too. But I can't get the image out of my head. The man's phone dropping from 80% to 0 in a heartbeat, right in the center of the pattern, only to come back once he stepped out. I haven't been back, and I don't think I will. But every time I drive past that stretch of road, even years later, I look across the fields and half expect to see that same perfect circle, waiting for someone or something to step inside it again. It started with the dog. I was renting a small place outside of Springfield, Missouri that summer. My landlord, an older guy named Dennis, lived on the same property, but a few hundred yards down the gravel road. He had corn on one side and wheat on the other, and he let me keep my car in one of his sheds. We'd sit on his porch sometimes, drink a beer, and talk about the weather. He had this mutt named Briscoe, a black and tan dog with a deep bark that carried across the fields. Friendly during the day, always wagging his tail, but he took his guarding seriously. One night in July, I was up late with the windows open. It was hot, sticky, no breeze, one of those nights where even the cicadas sounded tired. Around midnight, Briscoe started barking. Not just a couple barks. Full-on, non-stop barking, the kind where a dog doesn't pause to catch its breath. At first, I figured it was coyotes. They're common out there, and Briscoe hated them, but usually he'd bark a few times and then quiet down. This was different. He kept it up for hours. I finally gave up on sleep and walked out to my porch around 2 in the morning. From there, I could see Dennis's yard light in the distance. Briscoe was right at the edge of the wheat field, planted that year in this big, flat section behind the house. He wasn't pacing or moving around, just standing in one spot, barking straight into the crop. His whole body was rigid, like every muscle was locked. I yelled for him a couple times, but he didn't even glance my way. Just kept barking, throat raw, like something had him dead set. It went on until close to dawn. Around 5, the barking finally stopped. I assumed Briscoe had worn himself out, or Dennis had pulled him inside. I went back to bed for a couple hours. When I got up and headed over to return a ladder I'd borrowed, Dennis was already out in the field. Briscoe was lying near him, panting hard, tongue out, looking exhausted. I asked Dennis what the dog had been going crazy about all night. He just pointed deeper into the wheat. That's when I saw it. A circle. Clean as if it had been drawn with a giant stencil. The stalks were pressed flat, all in the same direction, not broken but bent. It hadn't been there the day before. I knew because I'd driven past on the gravel road that afternoon and the wheat had been smooth and unbroken all the way across. The circle was exactly where Briscoe had been barking. Same line of sight. Dennis wasn't the type to get worked up. He kept shaking his head, muttering about damn kids with boards and ropes. But even as he said it, I could see he didn't believe it. There hadn't been any tire tracks, no footprints, nothing disturbed, except the wheat inside the circle. We walked into it together. The air felt heavier, like stepping into a sauna, even though the sun wasn't fully up yet. It wasn't hot outside, but standing in that formation, sweat started to bead on my forehead almost immediately. Briscoe followed us to the edge but wouldn't go in. He paced back and forth, whining low, completely different from the fierce barking he'd done the night before. When I crouched to look at the stalks, I realized they weren't snapped. Each one was bent just above the ground at almost a perfect right angle, like someone had softened them and folded them down. Dennis pulled a compass out of his truck a little later, an old silver one he'd kept from his army days. He held it over the center of the circle, and the needle swung like crazy. It wouldn't lock onto north. He frowned and stepped back a few feet. Outside the circle, it settled immediately. He didn't say anything, just closed it up and slipped it back in his pocket. By afternoon, word had gotten out. A couple of neighbors stopped by, then some kids from town. Everyone wanted to walk into the circle, take pictures. Briscoe stayed under the porch, head down, watching them. Every time someone crossed the edge into that circle, his ears went back and he gave this low growl. That night, I was sitting on my porch again. It was a little cooler, the crickets loud, and I was half expecting Briscoe to start up again. Sure enough, around midnight, he went back to the same spot, not barking this time, just standing there, stiff as a post, staring at the wheat. The thing was, there was no new circle that night. Nothing appeared. He just stared, silent, for nearly an hour. Eventually, Dennis came out and called him in, and that was that. I moved away a couple months later when my job transferred me. But I never stopped thinking about that first morning, how the dog seemed to know exactly where that circle would show up, barking at nothing all night long until it was just there. It was late August when my cousin Adam called and asked if I wanted to come out with him and his friend Claire to see one of the crop circles that had shown up outside town. This was near Rockford, Illinois, not exactly the kind of place where you'd expect anything like that. Still, a local farmer had found a big one in his wheat, and word had spread. People had been driving out just to look at it from the road. Adam said we could probably walk out there if we were careful, so I agreed to go. We drove out that Saturday morning. It was cloudy and humid, already in the 80s before lunch. The field was on one of those flat stretches of county road where you can see for a mile in every direction. We parked a little ways down, tucked the car in by a line of trees, and walked along the ditch until we found a spot where the grass was worn down from other people slipping in. The first strange thing was how quiet it was. Normally, when you're out in fields like that, you hear cicadas, birds, wind through the crops. But stepping in, there was almost nothing, just our shoes brushing the stalks. We followed a path in where the wheat was bent down in a smooth, pressed way. It wasn't crushed like a truck had rolled over it, and it wasn't snapped or broken. Every stalk was bent near the base, all in the same direction, like they'd just decided to grow sideways. When we finally reached the circle itself, it was bigger than I'd expected, perfect edges, like it had been cut with a compass. I'd seen pictures online before, but standing in it was different. The ground felt uneven, like it sloped a little toward the center, even though the field itself looked flat from outside. Adam had brought this old Boy Scout compass. He pulled it out, half joking about testing for weird energy. He stood in the middle, held it level, and frowned. "That's not right," he said. I leaned over his shoulder and saw the needle spinning. Not wildly, but slow and steady, like it couldn't settle on a direction. Claire thought maybe the compass was broken. She had another one clipped to her backpack. She handed it over, and we watched that needle do the exact same thing, circling lazily, never locking on to north. We all stepped out of the circle to the untouched part of the field. Adam held both compasses side by side. Instantly, both needles snapped back to north and just stayed there like normal. He stepped 1 foot back into the flattened area, and they started drifting again. It was the cleanest, most obvious difference I'd ever seen. I remember looking up at the sky, half expecting to see something there, but it was just gray clouds moving slow. We stayed out there longer than we probably should have. The longer I stood inside that formation, the more I noticed a strange buzzing in my ears. Not like actual sound, more like the pressure you feel when you're in a plane climbing or descending. I thought it was just me until Claire asked if anyone else's head felt weird. We kept testing the compasses, walking back and forth across the line where the circle ended and the standing wheat began. Every single time, inside meant the needles wandered. Outside, everything was normal. At one point, Adam set the compass down in the middle of the circle, and we all backed up. The needle spun for a while, then froze, pointing east. He picked it up, and the moment he stepped toward the edge, it shifted again. The farmer eventually came out on his ATV. He didn't yell at us, but he wasn't happy. Said he'd already had people stomping around, and he didn't want more damage to the crop. We apologized and left. Walking back through the field, I noticed that once we were maybe 50 feet away from the circle, the pressure in my ears faded. On the drive home, none of us talked much. Adam just kept glancing at the compass in his lap, flipping it over like maybe he'd find a crack or something wrong with it. There wasn't. Later that night, I pulled out the compass app on my phone just to check. It worked fine in my apartment. I wondered what would have happened if I'd used it in that circle. We never went back, but I know for sure what I saw. Inside that formation, compasses didn't work. Outside, they did. That's all there is to it. I was driving home from work late, maybe around 11 at night. I take the same route every evening, 2-lane county road, nothing but fields on either side for miles. That night was clear but cool, one of those early fall evenings where the air already has that bite to it. I had the window cracked a little, music low, just zoning out and looking forward to bed. About halfway down County Line Road, there's this long stretch where the cornfields pull back into flat pasture. That's when I noticed it. Off to my right, above one of the fields, there was this orange light. At first, I thought it was a combine out late, maybe headlights facing the wrong way, but the color was wrong. It wasn't bright like headlights, and it wasn't moving along the ground. It was hovering above it. It was hard to gauge distance, but I'd guess it was maybe 30 or 40 feet above the crops. Not huge, just a ball of light. My first thought was maybe a drone with some weird light on it. People fly them around out there sometimes, though usually not at that hour. I slowed down, leaned toward the passenger side window to get a better look. The glow had this steady pulse, not flashing, not fading, just this soft, unnatural orange, like embers but floating. The weirdest part was how still it was. If it had been a drone, you'd expect it to drift or tilt a little. This thing just held its spot like it was pinned there. I remember checking my speed and realizing I'd slowed to maybe 20, creeping along the shoulder, staring at it. When I passed directly opposite the field, I swear the light dipped lower, like it sank a few feet. I can't say it reacted to me, but the timing made my stomach clench. I wanted to stop and pull over, but couldn't bring myself to. Something about being alone on that road, with nothing around but darkness and that thing over the crops, it didn't feel safe. I sped up, telling myself not to overthink it. After a couple minutes, I checked the mirror and the glow was gone. Just black fields behind me. I tried to forget it on the drive home, but my chest was tight the whole way, like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. The next morning, I had to drive the same road into town. It was around 7:30, full daylight. When I hit that same stretch, my eyes went straight to the field. At first, I thought nothing was there. Then I noticed it. A circle, dead center of the pasture. The grass was laid perfectly flat, almost like someone had pressed it down with a giant stamp. It wasn't messy, not like kids running around or someone driving a four-wheeler. The edges were sharp. I slowed way down and could see where the stalks bent in one direction, spiraling out from the middle. Whatever had done it hadn't torn or broken though. They were just bent down, smooth as if they'd grown that way. There was no sign of tracks leading in. No tractor marks, no footprints in the dirt. Nothing. Just a clean, perfect circle exactly where that orange light had been hovering. I pulled off onto the gravel shoulder and sat there for a while, just staring at it. Cars went by here and there, nobody slowing down. It was like I was the only one noticing. I thought about walking out into the field, but decided against it. I didn't want to trespass, and honestly, I didn't want to be standing in the middle of it. I drove past again later that evening. The circle was still there, clear as day. The farmer's house sits a quarter mile back from the road, and I wondered if he even knew yet. The weird part is, the circle never faded the way you'd expect. For the next week, I drove that road every day, and the flattened grass stayed perfect. Like time wasn't touching it. I never saw the orange light again, just that one night. but I can't shake how exact the placement was. The circle lined up with where I'd seen it, like it had been marking the spot. I don't know how to explain it. I just know what I saw on that road and what was there the next morning. I went out to the field that morning with the sickle bar on the tractor and a plan I'd been stewing on since dawn. Cut the damn thing down, make it look like nothing, get rid of whatever it was before anybody else saw it, and made a bigger mess out of it than it already was. The circle sat in the middle of my corn like somebody had dropped a lid there, a neat, dark ring maybe 30 feet across. The stalks inside were laid down in a swirl, not trampled, but folded, like someone took a giant hand and smoothed them. Around the rim, the corn looked singed, brown, brittle at the top, but there were no charred bits beyond that thin line. The dogs wouldn't even go past the lane. They stayed close to the pickup and watched with their heads cocked. I'd found it by accident the night before, driving home late after a run to town. The headlights had picked up the shimmer and then the break in the green. I'd parked on the road and walked the edge in the dark, thinking at first that maybe it was some county crew or a prank. No shoes prints, no board marks, no tire tracks. Just a perfect, ridiculous circle. I stood there for a long time and listened. The crickets went on like they didn't give a damn. The only thing that moved was the hair on my forearms. So this morning, I backed the old Ford into the lane, dropped the sickle, and pulled myself up. The engine hummed and the smell of hot oil filled the cab. I had the radio on low and a thermos of coffee in the cup holder. I drove across the headland and turned for the rim, planning to cut in a large arc and flatten it like you take a stain out of a rug. The dogs were not on the back fender like they usually were. Rufus, he's the old one, sat in the yard and watched me like he wanted to tug his feet out of the pasture. First pass went just fine. The blades bit into the stalks and they fell, and the sound of the tractor ate up the field noise. The circle looked like a sore thumb against the clean line of my cut. I swung the tractor around to come at it from another angle, and when I put the wheel over the rim and eased in, the engine spluttered and died. No warning. 1 second the lights were good, the next the dash went dark and the blades stopped. I cursed and fussed with the choke and the throttle. Old machines need coaxing, but the starter turned sluggish and then nothing. I got down, checked the fuel, the hoses, the battery terminals. Everything looked right. I was annoyed more than worried. I climbed back up, kicked the starter, and it turned over, coughing, and then stalled again the moment I crossed the rim. I sat there on the seat, listening to the field breathe, and felt that small prick of something like a cold thumb between my shoulder blades. I pushed the old tractor back, walked to the rim, and picked up a stalk. It was warm under my hand, like something had been there hours earlier and left it hot. The smell was metallic. I couldn't explain why my mouth tasted like pennies. The dogs sat by the fence and watched me with eyes that looked like they were cataloging sins. "You get grease in your ears, Henry?" I heard a voice say and looked up to see Marla Benson standing at the gate. She'd been at the feed store early. Everyone had been talking about the circle. She crossed her arms and squinted at the blackened rim. "You trying to burn it?" she asked. "No. Cut it," I said. "Tried to run the mower across. She stalls every time." She nodded like she'd heard that before. "Call the sheriff," she said. "Or Pete down at the extension. Somebody knows what to look for. You don't want half the county trampling the rim." I thought of that. I thought of more onlookers and their boots. I wanted to take care of it quietly, the same way you throw entrails over a fence and pretend a fox did the job. But I couldn't leave it. I didn't want to be the guy who'd let a mystery grow on his land because he was lazy. I tried one more time. I climbed back onto the seat, turned the key, and pulled the wheel in. The engine fired, but sluggish, like a man thunking awake on a winter morning. The sickle whined, carrots of green dropping away. I eased the tractor in, and the blades bit the outer knot of stalks. Then the dash went dead, and the engine died in a puff of smoke. This time, when I climbed down, I could feel the ground under my boots vibrating faintly, like something far off was humming. The dogs lifted their heads and listened. I spent the better part of the morning and mid-afternoon crawling under the hood, checking plugs, wires, Carburetor. Mr. Jensen down at the shop came out, wiped oil on his hand, and listened to the starter click and click, and then go quiet the moment the tires passed over that dark ring. "We've seen carburetors act up," he said in the way men who have been around machines say things, "but not this." He shook his head and tracered the arc in the dirt with a finger. "Maybe there's water in the fuel. Maybe it's the coil. Maybe today's not a day for tractors." It wasn't the parts. Jensen left his tester on the bench and came back with an old analog meter too, and every time the probes crossed outward from the rim, the readings went flat like someone cut the circuit. He poked at the dark soil around the edge and frowned. "Feels warm," he said. "Not hot. Warm." He wiped his palms on his jeans. "Smells like something strange too." There were other little things that didn't make sense. My wristwatch lost 2 minutes the night I found the circle. When I checked it later with my phone, it was wrong until I set it again. The county radio in the shop would chirp and drop static if you took it near the fence. Once, at dusk, a small white light hovered nearly above the rim and then vanished like a breath. My son Noah, who's 7 and sleeps with a dinosaur under his pillow, whispered from the back seat one morning, "Did your corn get sick, Pa?" as if the crop were a person. Word trickled out. A couple of the boys from school came at night to see, flashlights bobbing, laughter that started too loud and then died when we told them to stay back. Pastor Lee stopped by with a thermos and a face like he was holding prayer in his hands to see how he might help. Sheriff Marquez took measurements and stood on the rim with his boots balanced on the edge, the radio clipped and silent when he stepped inward. He tried his phone, and it showed no service, even though a minute earlier he'd been texting with the dispatcher. He left a report, a polite man writing in even italics, and borrowed Jensen's tools to check the wiring on his cruiser before he left. The sun baked the field into a brittle hush. I sat on the porch a lot those days, mug cooling in my hand and the dogs napping at my feet, watching strangers' headlights comb the lane and thinking about the way the circle looked from the road, like a coin pressed flat in the earth. It brought reporters after a while, the usual sort, with bright cameras and soft voices, who asked whether I believed in anything and tried to record my reaction when I said I didn't know. Cameras make us shape our thoughts into neat lines. I tried not to give them any. When I wasn't crawling under hoods or answering questions, I walked the property line. The cows, Old Bess and Ruth and the rest, stood on the far fence by day like a line of statues, eyes fixed on the dark patch as if it were the kind of thing that teaches you to hate walking. Their stomachs kept churning out that slow bovine breath. When I tossed a bucket of feed out near the gate, they snorted and backed away from it like it had a smell on it they didn't like. That hurt in the blunt way it hurts when animals won't do what they've always done. Animals rarely behave like that without reason. One afternoon, after a storm, I walked back from the field toward the house and noticed my footprints in the soft dirt near the lane. They were mine. Big, clumsy boots, the heel scuff I wear from favoring one leg in winter. I hatched toward the porch and froze. There were other prints, too, smaller, circling my house in a neat arc. They were muddy, as if someone had walked the perimeter in wet shoes, but there had been no rain since dawn, and the ground around the house was dry. The prints didn't match any boot I knew. The tread was shallow and even, and when I bent close, it looked like the pattern of a work boot, but not mine. They made a ring at about 3 feet from the porch edge and continued around the back, even under the porch where the mud had been pressed faintly into the soil. I told myself someone had come while I was out fussing with the tractor, some teenager trying to make a point, some neighbor with an odd sense of humor. But the porch door was locked and the latch hadn't been disturbed. The kids' bicycles sat in the garage where I left them in the evening. I called Marla, and she told me she'd been at home all afternoon with her kids. Maybe it was a raccoon, she suggested, and I could tell she wanted it to be small and natural. Raccoons don't leave boot prints like a regular tread, though, and they don't walk in such a tidy circle. I started walking the loop of prints, counting them like a man trying to keep track of birds in a tree. They were spaced a steady length apart, a rhythm that suggested a single pair of feet taking measured steps. The mud within the prints had dried slightly in the edges, and the smell was faint, but they're all the same. sharp and metallic, the same pennies taste I kept getting when I rubbed my fingers under my tongue. I looked for smudges on the porch, scratches on the wood, anything to suggest a ladder or a rope. My neighbor's trail cam, one of those cheap ones he set up to catch deer, had been pointed the other way all season. I called Sheriff Marquez and left a message. He called back in the evening, voice careful. He said he'd swing by in the morning and bring someone from forensics if I wanted. I told him not to bother. I didn't know why I said that. Maybe I was ashamed of the idea that somebody had walked around my house in the daytime and I hadn't heard it. That night, I didn't sleep. The house had a live hum to it that wasn't the refrigerator, more like something under the floors. I got up at 3 and went to the kitchen, and my phone lit up with a missed call from a number I didn't recognize. Time-stamped at 1:06 a.m. I hadn't left the room that early. I drank the coffee cold and felt like a man with one hand on a clock whose hands kept moving wrong. In the morning, Sheriff Marquez came by with boots that crunched differently on the gravel, and a man from the county office in shoe covers and a clipboard with official stamps. They inspected the ring around the house and nodded like they knew how to catalog weird. "No prints leading away from property?" Marquez asked. I shook my head. "Just around the house?" he asked. I nodded. He looked at me with a face that read, "Is it possible I'm telling you nonsense, or is it real and I ought to be helping you?" They took photographs and swabbed the mud. The sample went in a little vial, and the man in shoe covers put it in his pocket coin for later. Marquez told me to keep the kids inside and to keep any visitors off the property until the tests came back. I agreed because it felt like the right thing to do and because I didn't want strangers making the place worse. Days passed, and the tractor wouldn't start when the wheels crossed the rim. Mechanics came and left the same way, tools fiddling, shaking heads. The county's people wrote polite notes, and then longer ones. They sent a drone up, and the footage made the spiral look smaller, like something that would make sense from an angle and not in person. The mud sample came back with nothing that any civilian could mean, just traces, not toxic, not anything that fit the usual headings. The sheriff kept his radio on his belt and checked it like a man with a talisman. The prints around the house faded after a week in the sun. I kept squinting at the porch like I expected to see them still, circling in a ghostly line. The corn turned gold, and when the combines finally came in, they couldn't get through the center. The weave of stalks gummed the knives, and 3 machines had belts slip, and someone swore under their breath. They left the center like a wound you don't touch. Sometimes, late at night, when the air is still and the house is a boat on a dark sea, I stand in the doorway and look out at where those prints used to be. The dogs sleep, and my kids breathe in the next room, and the thermostat ticks. I listen for the hum and for the click of a starter that has learned its limits. I have no tidy answer. I have a yard with a ring, a tractor that dies when it crosses that line, and a set of muddy footprints that walked a steady circle around my house and then stopped like someone had decided they were done. I keep fixing the ordinary things: replacement belts for the combine, a new battery on the tractor that works fine until it crosses the rim, a porch light on a motion sensor that won't go off when something moves just beyond the yard. I go to town for parts, I pay bills, I tell the kids to keep their shoes by the back door. I sleep when I can and wake when I can't. Some nights, the penny taste comes back in my mouth for no reason, and I swallow and wash it away. When harvest finishes and the field is empty and the wind rubs its palms over the stubble, the circle is still there in a way the eye can catch at certain times of day, like a low line against the horizon. I don't know what put it there. And I don't know why my tractor stopped running when it crossed that ring, or why something walked a measured ring around my house and left nothing else. I don't know whether it was a prank, a trick of weather, or something that doesn't have a neat name in the county offices. I do know the sounds of my own machines and the feel of my hands on the wheel, and I know when things work and when they don't. I take what I can fix, and I file the rest away like old receipts. The circle sits in the field, the mud ring faded to a memory, and sometimes when the moon is new and the night is thin, I stand in the lane and look at both and wait for a sound that might explain them. Mostly I stand and learn to live with not knowing. Hank woke me up by thumping his tail against the bedroom wall like he was trying to knock the house over. It was dark, and the clock on the dresser read 4:02 a.m. I swore under my breath, pulled on jeans and a jacket over my bare feet, and let him out the back door. The night had that heavy, wet smell you get before a thunderstorm, and the air sat low across the yard. I saw the cows from the porch light before I heard them. The whole herd pressed at the far fence in a line, heads up, bodies tight like they'd been told to stand still. That wasn't right. They usually milled toward the feed in the barnyard at dawn, not stood like statues watching something. Bess, Ruth, and the others, 20 of them, should have been scattered across the field by that hour. Instead, they were at the fence, breathing in the same slow rhythm, eyes fixed on the center of the corn like they'd decided something in there mattered more than anything else. I locked the back door behind me and walked down the lane. Hank patted at my heels, ears perked, making little sniffing sounds. The pasture gate clanged as I opened it. Up close, the cows were quieter than you'd expect. You could hear their breaths and the dip of the field. A moth banged itself against the ear of the fence post like a tiny, frantic heart. Then I saw the circle. It sat in the middle of the field, the lid of something. Maybe 30 feet across, perfect at the edge and messy at the center, but there was a rim, blackened and crisp, and the corn inside had been pressed down in a pattern that made my stomach drop. It wasn't flattened the way wind or a combine flattens things. The stalks were dark browned at the tips and then blackened in a way that looked singed. There was a smell too, high and sharp and tasting of pennies in the back of my throat, metallic, ozone-ish. I walked closer, heels of my boots spitting up dust. There were no footprints, no board marks, no tire tracks leading to it. The dirt around the rim was smooth like it had been vacuumed. I crouched and touched a burnt stalk. The ash stuck to my glove. Hank leaned into my calves and whimpered, ears flat. I thought vandalism at first. Kids with lighters. Some local idiot with a need for attention. But who burns an exact circle and leaves the inside woven in with a spiral? The pattern had a geometry to it that felt deliberate in a way that made you squint at it. It made all the hairs along my arms lift. I called Maya. I wanted to tell her not to wake the kids yet, and to ask if she wanted me to wait for her to come out. Her voice sounded small on the phone. "Don't go in," she said, and you'd have thought I was asking to go near a hornet's nest. She told me to wait for her and the boys. I told her the cops would come if we needed them. She told me to be careful and hung up fast. I didn't wait. I'm stubborn like that. I stepped over the broken grass, close to the rim but not inside. The air changed the minute my boot cleared the edge. It took me a second to place it, thicker, like standing with a glass bowl over your head. And then there was a pressure behind my eyes that felt like someone had pressed a finger there and held it. My head made a quiet, low ringing, and my knees wanted to give. I took the 3 steps back at once and sat down on the top rail of the fence like I just finished a long run. When I checked my pocket watch, the cheap one my dad gave me that I keep for nothing important, it read 3:06. I remember thinking that was odd because I knew it had been 4:02 when I'd left the house. The watch wasn't right, or I wasn't. I set it by my phone later and the phone said 4:06. My thumb left a smear in the glass. I wasn't sure which minute had slipped away. By mid-morning, Frank from over the road came down with his truck. He'd put his son on the bus and come straight back with coffee in a paper cup. He pulled over at the lane and climbed the fence with the ease of a man who's done it 1,000 times. Frank doesn't scare easy. He'd been on the job at the mill for 20 years, and he carries the look of someone who prefers facts. We walked the rim together. He touched a stalk like he wanted to check the burn pattern. "Not burned like you toss a match," he said. "More like a sear." He made a face and folded his fingers against his palm. He took photos with his phone, and the screen dimmed as he tried to zoom in, like someone had put a hand over the lens. "Call the sheriff," he said. "This ain't our kind of thing." The sheriff's car showed up not long after. 2 deputies climbed out and came up to the fence. Deputy Luther smiled the thin smile of men trying to make a job feel ordinary. They talked into their radios and into their phones like it was the usual thing, checking records, taking names, while keeping eyes on the circle. I heard Luther say something about the county extension taking samples. He stepped in toward the rim and his radio fell silent. It cut clean. The little speaker went from talk to nothing the second his boot crossed an invisible line. He looked at the device like he'd been slapped by his own radio. Huh, he said, and took a step back. His partner, Daniels, tried the radio from another angle, and the same thing happened. The chatter stopped, and the green light blinked like a breath. We all took 3 steps back, then forward, and every time someone came within that mark, the devices died. The deputies moved around the edge in slow circles, testing it like they were trying to find where the battery went out. There were white vans, and the county extension man, Tommy, arrived with gloves and a clipboard. He was nervous but thorough, placing sample jars and tapping the ground. He had a meter that he ran along the rim and shook his head. Reading spike, he said. Weird interference. He didn't sound thrilled. He sounded like someone who had just found a hydroplane on dry land. People came and went. Phones that usually had bars showed no service when you stepped toward the circle. My own pickup radio, that old AM crackler I listened to when the corn needs peace, would pop and then go to a flat hiss if I eased down the lane past a certain point. The dogs stayed by the gate like they were guarding the world. The cows, God, the cows, didn't budge. They stood at the fence line for hours, legs like poles, eyes on the circle. When a neighbor tried to lead one of them across the yard with feed, the animal skittered in a way I'd never seen, shook himself, and then clung back to the group. The smell was weird too. Every now and then you'd get a blast of it, like standing close to electrical gear that had too much current. It made the back of my throat tingle. I rubbed my tongue with my thumb the first time it happened, and metal lingered like someone had slipped a coin under my tongue. That night, I slept badly. The house felt wrong, too quiet, every clock loud. I woke up twice and found my phone sitting on the kitchen counter with the screen lit and an outgoing call logged at 3:12 a.m. I hadn't made it. The missed call on my phone logged no number. It said, unknown. I assumed someone dialing a wrong number until I remembered the pocket watch and the minute that had slipped. I felt like a man locking a door twice and still worrying. For a few days, the town was a nervous thing. People cut their business short at the diner and drove home with windows closed. The kids at school whispered about strange lights over the Benson field. Someone put up a cheap rope around the circle, and folks kept a respectful distance. The extension lab took its samples and sent them off, hedging on words like unusual composition and recommend further testing. That didn't help much. Unusual just makes your brain run faster to find something ordinary. Then came the sound. It wasn't loud like a siren. It was a low, thin hum that crawled up in the bones. I first heard it one evening as I was putting the horses away. It started like a thread of pressure in my molars, a faint vibration that made my teeth feel like they were gently ringing. At first, I thought it was the transformer on the pole down the road, but a call to the co-op showed no outages, and the lineman said the lines were fine. It kept happening, and whenever it did, the dogs would freeze and look far off, towards the circle. The cows would lift their heads and listen in the same slow way, as if the sound belonged to something big and patient. Deputy Luther came by midweek to check on things. He said he couldn't sleep. That ringing won't quit, he told me, looking like a man who'd lost a game he didn't know he'd played. He rubbed the bridge of his nose with his fingers. He told me he'd gone back to the station and lay awake with the radio on, and yet the sound sat under it like a second radio. He'd logged the day off. His partner had done the same. Both of them said the word buzzing, like it was a thing you could reach into and scoop up. I began to notice small time slips everywhere. My wristwatch would lose minutes if I stood and watched the field for too long. My son's alarm clock blinked funny and once woke him an hour early for school with no reason. The barn radio caught a signal once that wasn't human. No voices, just a tone that rose and fell like a throat clearing. But when I rewound the old tape recorder we'd set up, it was blank at that time. The devices recorded silence where I thought I heard something. At night, the fields seemed to collect light differently. Once, on a night with no moon, a small white point hung over the circle for a long time and then went out. It wasn't a plane. It didn't move like one. It just hung there like a pinprick in a black cloth. and then it wasn't. My neighbor Mark called from his porch and said he thought his eyes were playing tricks. But it was there, he said. He sounded like a man in sleep with an unfinished sentence. Harvest came and the combine chewed through the field all around the rim and then stuttered and fouled when the operator tried to cut the center. Machines don't like things they can't turn over, and that center had a weave like a rug. The men called it stubborn and left it. They put bunting around it, and the sight of that little roped-off patch right in the middle of acres made it feel less like a human mistake and more like an answer someone else's house had been given. Months passed. People made their jokes and rented a drone to fly over it and show footage. The drone footage made the pattern look smaller from above, and yet somehow more intricate. The extension finally said they couldn't say what had caused the discoloration. And the chemical tests came back with lines on paper that meant something to people in labs and not much to the rest of us. All the official little people shuffled paperwork, and the thing stayed in the field like a bruise. The ringing in some people's heads eased with time. Deputy Luther came back to work after 2 weeks and looked like he'd gone through a long winter. He didn't talk about it much. He'd flip his radio to a channel and let it sit in his hand like a worry stone. Sometimes he would lean on the cruiser and look to the south like the field was a story with missing pages. Other times he'd laugh and put his arm around a kid at the county fair like everything was fine while his mouth kept the weight of unspoken days. I learned to live around it. The cows eventually grazed closer, but never through the center. They skirted it like something polite people avoid. Don't step on the flower bed. Don't step on the ritual. Hank stopped whining at night most of the time, but he'd sometimes stare, ears forward toward the field for a while, and then flop down with a thump like someone telling him it's nothing to worry about. Sometimes at night, when the house settles and the boys are asleep and the refrigerator buzzes like a small insect, I'll stand on the porch with my mug and look out. The circle is a pale patch in some light and nothing in others. I still taste metal sometimes, the penny taste, when the wind is right. I still get a faint twinge behind my eyes when I inch too close to the rim, the same dull pressure that tells me something tooth-fine passed through my head once and left a line. I don't have a tidy explanation. You try things on, kids, pranksters, weather, a chemical spill, and some of them fit the edges, but none of them hold the shape. The men from the county took notes and lab coats, the deputies took time off, the extension sent scientists with polite faces. We kept our lives. We repaired the fence, fixed the leak in the barn, paid the bills. The kids still had soccer games. Maya still made coffee in the same chipped pot. The circle remained in the middle of the field through the harvest and the first snow. If you stood on the road in the right light, you could see the rim like a faint scar. Once, months later, a kid from town who thought he was brave tried to walk up to the rope and poke a stalk. His father grabbed him and sent him home. That was the right move. We kept the center roped, and we made a habit of not stepping in at other people's questions. When I tell the story, I don't dress it up. I say what happened. The cows wouldn't go near it. The rim was black and smooth. Something made the radios die close to the rim. People couldn't sleep because of a low buzzing in their heads. That's the ledger. The rest, what that means, why it happened, doesn't sit like a thing you can put on a shelf. It's a loose page. At night now, if the wind comes from the south and the lightning is far off and the house is warm, I'll stand and watch the field like some men watch the horizon for storms. The circle is there. The cows move around it in their old lazy patterns, the rhythm of them like a clock. I go back inside to my family. I shut the door. My watch keeps time without argument. The dogs sleep. The quiet stays quiet most of the time. Some things show up and don't tidy themselves away. You mark them on a map, you measure them, you talk about them at the diner, and then you hang on to the life you had because it's the only thing that fits your hands. I still walk the fence at dawn sometimes and look out at that dark ring like it's an answer I can't read. I come home, put a coffee on, and sit at the kitchen table and fold my hands around the mug and listen to the ordinary sounds of a house being a house. We held the meeting in the school gym because there wasn't room anywhere else. Town hall was too small, the VFW was booked for bingo, and everyone figured the gym could fit the tractors if it came to that. It was a Thursday, humid for late September, and the gym smelled like sweat and bleach and the concession stand's last box of stale nacho chips. I was there because my land runs into the Benson place, and if anyone was going to lose sleep over circles showing up in someone's corn, it might as well be the people who owned the corn. People trickled in until the bleachers sank under the weight of neighbors and strangers. Farmers in Carhartts shoved past teachers in dresses, the sheriff in his shirt sleeves stood by the door, and Pastor Lyle sat 2 rows from the front and nodded like he was waiting for the proper sermon. The mayor started by reading the notices, zoning this, drainage that, and then she cleared her throat and said what we all knew. Multiple fields in town had strange circles in them, perfect rings, patterns pressed into the stalks. She used the word anomalies, which always sounds half technical and half resigned. Someone at the back cheered and then tried and failed to clap quietly. We passed around a few photos someone had taken from the Benson lane. A crisp, dark circle maybe 30 feet across, the corn inside pushed down in a pattern like a slow whirlpool. It looked ridiculous in print, very tidy, like someone's idea of old folklore made real. People laughed a little because laugh is how you start when you want the room to feel normal. But the laughs dropped off quick. Old Mrs. Hargrove, she keeps bees and makes quilts, put up her hand and said the cows wouldn't go near the field that week. "They'll stand 10 feet from that fence and just watch," she said. Her voice was small but steady, and you could tell she wasn't spinning a tale. Farmer Dalton, who runs 2 combines and a temper but no patience for fuss, muttered that his boy saw a light hover near the Benson's place the night before. The sheriff, Carter, said he'd been out there as well, and that his radio acted up when he got within 30 feet of the circle. He said it like it was a report. He didn't use the dramatic tone people expect when something odd hangs in the air. People started talking over each other then. Teenagers whooped and told urban legends about crop circles. Some younger men blamed outside pranksters with ladders and string and beer. The grad student from the county extension, Tommy, a kid in a Cornell sweatshirt with nervous hands, said they took soil samples and they weren't sure yet what they found. He kept saying inconclusive and looking to the sheriff as if the sheriff would say, "See? Tell them it's nothing." Sheriff Carter just rubbed his mouth and stared at the floor like he wanted to be anywhere but here. I sat on one of the metal folding chairs in the front row with my jacket over my knees because I was fidgety. "My name is Aaron. I work at the feed store, and I help Gabe with his combine sometimes. I know fields and the way wind and weather do things." These circles didn't match any of that. They had edges like someone took a cookie cutter to the land and pressed hard. Midway through the meeting, when Mayor Walsh was introducing a guy from the local TV who wanted to come film the county extension team the next morning, the lights cut. It was clean and short like someone flipped a giant switch. 1 second the gym was bathed in fluorescent glare, and the next there was a dark that felt thick and immediate. Somebody laughed nervously. Somewhere a kid shouted, "Whoa!" A sigh went around the room like an old blanket. Phones lit up like little constellations, heads bowed and faces blue lit in the dark. A few people left the bleachers and went to the doors to see what happened. The emergency lights clicked on after a beat, weak bulbs painting the floor. Pastor Lyle mumbled something about prayer, and the sheriff said something about stepping out to check the system. I'd gotten up without thinking and went with him because the parking lot is on the north side and the Benson field was visible from the curb if you craned your neck the right way. Outside, air hit you differently in the dark. Thick and warm, the way humidity tastes on the back of your teeth. The line of cars in the lot looked like a row of eyes. The sheriff's cruiser idled, the blue lights out. He stepped toward the lights on the school and clicked his radio. No static, no voice. He clicked again, and the little LED went green and then dark as if it had been told to be polite and then be quiet. He swore softly and passed the mic to me. I clicked it and heard nothing but my own breath. We walked to our cars under the wash of emergency lighting. Someone had left the gym door open, and the noise of muffled talk came through like a radio station on the edge of reception. I could see the Benson field from there, a black wash beyond the far street, but it's far enough that at night you could imagine anything there. I kept glancing toward it because the thought of that neat circle lodged in my head like a splinter. Then, in a single moment that wasn't loud but had teeth, every car alarm in the lot went off at once. It didn't ramp up. There was no countdown. It was as if someone pressed a button and all the little batteries in the key fobs clicked the same way. The sound hit like a slap, shrill, mechanical, the sort of noise that makes your hands cover your ears without thinking. Horns chirped, sirens beeped, alarms that usually sound private and mild made the whole parking lot sound like a factory of old machines. People ducked and grabbed at their keys, and some of the older men on the bleachers put their hands over their ears and hunched. I remember the feeling more than the noise after that. The way the chest constricted, like when a neighbor's dog starts and doesn't know where to hide. Someone shouted, "Turn them off!" and 10 people waved their remotes blindly at their cars. Keys were shoved into doors and engines started in a surprise, like people defying a rule that had made their own devices rebel. One woman in a beige coat was sobbing. It was a short, sharp sound that made the alarm feel mean, even though it was just a machine. Sheriff Carter barked for calm and pushed his way past, but his voice was swallowed by the beeping. Then, as sudden as it had begun, the alarms stopped. They didn't fade. They cut off like someone killed them. There was a pulse in the air, and then the world felt slightly smaller. People stood frozen, blinking, like they'd been waking from a bad dream. Sirens in the far distance wavered. Someone in the back row said the lights had come back on inside. The gym's fluorescent hum returned, and the faces in the bleachers were pale in that flat light. A chorus of radios in people's pockets chimed, and then showed calls from unknown numbers. The sheriff walked the lot and checked cars, frowning. No one had left keys in the ignition that would explain the alarms going off on their own. Most of the remotes worked when he tested them. Some cars' remote lights flashed like normal, but the ones whose alarms had chosen to act up just before the cut, those didn't respond. A handful of folks found their stereos reset to weird stations, and one farmer discovered a small burn mark on the hood of his truck, like the finish had bubbled in a neat, half-dollar-sized spot. Electrical surge, someone said, the way people say it was the weather when they're hoping for a clean culprit. Sheriff Carter crouched and put a hand near the burn mark as if he could feel the answer. He checked the running lights and said nothing definitive. Tommy from Extension kept rubbing his hands and saying the soil tests would go to the university now. And please, if anyone's got more photos, send them. Mayor Walsh called for calm and asked people to go home and wait for updates. People drifted, the way they do after something sharp happens. Fast, then slow, clutching phones like lifelines. In the parking lot, cars that had alarmed earlier sat quiet, their hoods closed and empty of explanation. I lingered because my truck was the far one, and because on impulse I wanted to see if the Benson field, if the circle was lit by something odd. From the lot, it looked like a darker patch in the dark, nothing more. At home that night, the house felt too loud. Leah had fallen asleep on the couch. The TV was tuned to something about weather. I sat with a beer and tried to convince myself things had a rational order. 10 simultaneous car alarms meant something ordinary, some wiring hiccup or mass freakout. But sleep didn't come easily. My phone buzzed with a text from Sheriff Carter that said, "Come by Friday. Need to talk? You and Jim?" I typed back, "Yeah," and felt that small knot in my gut like a loose thread. The next day, the paper printed a picture of the bleachers with people's heads bowed and a caption that used the word synchronized. On talk radio, they played clips, snippets of the alarms, and Mayor Walsh trying to sound reasonable. People offered explanations on Facebook. Someone with an electrical and engineering degree wrote a long comment about electromagnetic interference, and then another person called him a quack. The grad student posted a photo of a soil sample and a careful caption that said, "Differences observed." The sheriff put out an advisory asking people to report anything unusual. Unusual became the week's adjective. The officers who had come to the gym that night, Ramirez and Holden, took a week off after the frantic parking lot and the swarm of calls. Their deputies said the two men complained of headaches that throbbed in the center of the skull and ringing that wouldn't stop. Ramirez told his wife the sound had been like a swarm inside his head, like bees, but everywhere, and she took him to the clinic. Holden's wife said he woke in the middle of the night with this cold sweat and couldn't bear to be near the car radio. The town whispered sympathy and suspicion the way small towns do. The sheriff's lieutenant said they'd been checked and there was no sign of foreign chemicals. No one was asked to leave town. No one was detained. Over the next few nights, I started hearing a small tone behind everything. Not loud, not constant. Just a thread at the edge of hearing when the kettle boiled or when the refrigerator kicked on. Sometimes it was worse, thin and high and on the verge of being a hiss. Sometimes it was nothing. I couldn't tell if the tone was outside, like wind over a wire, or inside, like tinnitus. Leah said nothing, but she kept the TV on later than usual and didn't like the radio in the truck being loud. 3 nights after the alarms, I went out to the Benson field. The hair on my arms prickled for no sensible reason. The rope the county put up around the circle kept the gawkers back and gave it an odd dignity, like something fragile. One of the teenage boys from school was crouched by the rope with a camera and under his breath swore softly when he saw me. He showed me a picture on his screen. Up close, the stalks inside the ring were bent at the same point, not crushed, not frayed, like someone had folded them gently and pressed them flat. Tommy from Extension was there, up to his elbows in gloves as he checked a quadrant. He let me look at one of the soil trays under his light. Tiny flakes of something clung to the roots, bright and odd in the lamp. He wouldn't say what they'd found for certain. "We need more testing," he said. He sounded tired, not necessarily scared. Tom told me the cameras he'd set up the night of the power cut recorded a spike, an increase in electromagnetic noise, right when the alarms blew, but the video was corrupted like someone hit the file with static. He said it like a man who had his hands on the edge of something and then snatched them back. The weeks slid on and people learned to put the oddness on a shelf. The farmer who found the burn mark had it buffed out. The woman in the beige coat moved her car to a garage. Ramirez came back to work and seemed fine in fits. He'd laugh and do his rounds, but sometimes he'd stare into a corner for a long while. Patrols went out to the fields and took tidy notes. New rings appeared, smaller ones, in a pasture out by the river. Cameras were set up, and locals posted them and dissected the footage like surgeons. Months later, after the harvest and the winter plow, the spiral in Benson's field was just a thumbprint on the land, visible in certain light, not in others. The town kept its routine. The feed store stayed where it was. Pastor Lyle still called on the sick. Leah still told me to clean the gutters at least once a year. But the sound lingered in pockets. Sometimes I'd hear a quick chorus of horns down at the convenience store when someone hit the crosswalk sensor wrong. And for a second, my chest tightened like it did the night of the meeting, and I had to slow my breath. People ask for answers. Electricians, scientists, clergymen, a man from late-night radio who wanted to interview me for the audience. I told each of them what happened, how the lights went out halfway through a meeting, how every car in the lot bellowed at once like a pack of machines having one panic, how the alarms died on the same tick. I told them about the grad student with his gloves and the soil that looked a little off under the lamp. I told them about the men who couldn't sleep because of a buzz they described like bees in their heads. None of them fit together the way you want puzzle pieces to. They fit at the corners and left a mismatch in the middle. I sleep most nights in our bed, Leah beside me, the dog at our feet. Sometimes, in the small hours, I get up and stand at the porch and look toward the Benson property. The fields are flat and honest in the dark. If I stare long enough, I think I can pick out the impression left by that round, tidy absence of standing corn. When I do, I imagine the parking lot and the sudden mechanical cry and the brief hush after. I imagine the faces under fluorescent lights best under the emergency bulbs, startled and small, and the sheriff turning a dead radio over in his hand like you might turn a useless coin. I drove past the town hall the other evening, and the gym was lit with a group fitness class. The bleachers were empty. A pair of headlights cut across the Benson field for a moment, and then were gone. My hands tightened on the wheel without my permission. I slowed and the truck hummed along, radio dead between stations. On my dash, the clock ticked like nothing had happened at all. I made it home that night, checked the locks, and put the truck in the garage. The dog greeted me at the door like a patient thing. Leah was already in bed with the light on, reading. I told her about nothing at all, how the meeting went, how the alarm sounded, and she smiled in that careful way and said, "We'll be fine," like those two words could be a roof. I don't have a neat ending. We make our way through schedules and small fixes. We pay the taxes and stack the firewood. The town keeps its debates going in the post office over coffee, whether the circles were art, weather, or someone messing with us. People are kind and small town skeptical in a way that keeps a place steady. But sometimes, when a storm passes or a power line hums, there's that hint again, a small, thin note that lives just beyond easy hearing. And for a moment, my hands remember the squeeze they took on my keys that night when every alarm started up together, like the whole world took a breath and then let it go.